would you please welcome, a warm welcome to Dr. Eldon Rice.
Thank you very much, Scott. We're thankful that you're here. Welcome. I would like to extend my thanks to those people who made this possible. They're anonymous donors that have given money to make sure that this could happen. There's 3 venues. This is the first of 3. To give a little background, I am from Colorado. I was in Colorado for 3 years. Before that, we spent 20 years in California raising 8 kids there in the Bay Area. Don't throw tomatoes. So being a conservative in the Bay Area was an interesting experience, and we learned a lot. When I came here, I kind of wanted to rest. The values of South Dakota were our values, and we do have relatives in the area, in Hermosa, gone back 100 years, so we have ties to this area, or specifically my wife's family. But I started to see, I was real concerned when I started to see these storm clouds gathering in the form of Common Core. I'm going to broaden your view a little bit here just for a minute. These problems have been developing for many years. The latest symptom is Common Core. If we do defeat Common Core, it's still going to be an issue. And so it's going to be an issue because the agendas that are driving this are not going to go away, okay? I'm familiar with the groups that are behind this. When I found out who was driving this, I thought, uh-oh, I've seen this before, and I know where this is going, you know? And my concern here is that you'll think, well, it won't happen in South Dakota because, you know, California is California, and this is South Dakota. Well, it will be driven here through the federal government. They'll make sure it gets here, or they're going to try to make sure that it gets here through various organizations. And I won't go into detail about that. We'll only have plenty of time from Dr. Testa, but I organized Citizens for Academic Transparency specifically because what I found, even in California, is that parents' values were, you know, pretty good in a general rule, and the school's values were quite different, you know. And I'm thinking, well, they're getting away with this because parents aren't informed. You know, I spent some time getting petitions signed for no R-rated movies in school without parental permission. I mean, I don't like them being shown at all. My personal view is, but at least get permission slips. And I found that about 80% of people in California signed that. Now, so these types of things, you know, are creeping in. Now, I've been to the school board several times. There's a little door hanger that our goal is to get these door hangers on every door in Rapid City. Okay, you'll be seeing this. There's some here. The first thing on here is the pornography. For some reason, we won't speculate as to why, but we've had a problem with what I consider to be pornographic literature in the schools for a lot of years, and it's here now. I went to the school board asking them to please meet with me, discuss this with me. I gave them my card, have lunch. I sent them a letter requesting various things. We won't get into all of them, but one of them saying, look, we need permission slips. We want a parental committee to sort of decide, you know, what rating this should be and get permission to sign from parents. A very reasonable thing, I think, to do. And, you know, there's been crickets chirping. They had plenty of chances to get a hold of me and discuss with me. I was hoping that they were going to say to me, oh, I had no idea that was going on. Let's talk, you know, let me see what we can do about this. That seems reasonable. Nothing. So I've got some real concerns about the current school board. And there's a couple other issues also. We have this issue of the gag order. Now, they said that's not a gag order. You can call it what you want. Sanborn wrote an article, many of you are aware of that, about the item or the resolutions passed by consent agenda stating that the teachers could not talk to the media about Common Core, and the principals called them in. There was an article November 17th where the teachers got called in and says, I don't want you talking about this to anybody, you're not authorized. So I have a problem with this lack of open dialogue. That's on here. There's issues in the curriculum. What often happens to the Weekly Reader and some of these federal programs is you know, we all know that colleges have become very political, okay? And typically it's pretty one-sided. It's just filtering right down into the elementary schools, the junior high schools. And so we asked for free speech clubs and some academic balance. We tried this in California. The school board was with us, said you must do this, and the school did not allow it. My wife was on the committee. So if you think that these books, and we'll talk about some of these, are not in school. My wife has gone and checked in the library. Librarian said, yeah, they're here, and there's worse books than that. So it's here, it's being presented to your kids. I suppose being from California, I got used to, I was friends with liberals. I didn't agree with much of what they said. I'm tolerant toward them, but I really draw a line when the school says, I'm going to do this, and I don't need to tell you about it. Their attitude is, I'm the child's guardian. I will do with what your child I feel is what I will do with your child, what I feel is appropriate, whether you like it or not, or without your knowledge. So that's where I really have a problem, and I'm getting those kinds of feelings here. So our goal with CAT, we want parents on the school board or people that will guard the parental rights of the kids. We can have a long conversation about whether exposing developing children to pornography is harmful, and I think there's plenty of evidence of that. We're not going to do that tonight, but we may have a meeting on that in the future. So Dr. Pesta will touch on this, I think. But so without further ado, and thank you for coming, Dr. Pesta. I really appreciate it. We will have these outside. You'll hear from me. If you'd like to sign up on the mailing list, please come and help us. Thank you.
If you're able, would you stand with me and let's pray. We like to talk to God here in this state, don't we? Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for this wonderful state in which we live. We thank you for the United States. We do believe this was your concept. You called people here, people who knew that you were calling them to establish truly a colony of believers who would affect a brand new region on your planet. And we thank you that you still speak to your people to bring change and to bring some change when change is needed. And we thank you for alerting those who were involved with Dr. Rice, with this group, Citizens for Academic Transparency. And we thank you for Dr. Pesta. They and all of the people who were involved in helping to educate and alert people to what Common Core is. And we thank you for what will happen tonight, that our eyes will be all the more opened and we would understand more what our response should be. So we give you credit for speaking to your people and directing your people at the right time, in the right way. And we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen. 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 Let's face the flag. Let's recite those wonderful words of the allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. We're going to get right to the program with Dr. Pesta. Something I also get to do is be the public policy advisor for KLNP and KSLT Christian Radio here in South Dakota, and was able to interview Dr. Pesta for a program this past week. I appreciate very much his understanding of this subject and what he has done. He has spoken in over 30 states, over 200 times, speaking to individuals and legislators about Common Core. And his resume, his bio is so impressive and so long, I do not have time to read it. But I'm telling you, it is quite impressive. He is somebody who does not waste his life. He does not waste his calling. He doesn't waste the gifts that God has given to him to think, to write, to create a curriculum for students. You can go online. He has put together a high school curriculum, classics-based curriculum. Fantastic. We like people that do these kind of things. Dr. Pesta, by the way, does not charge. He's here because this is a burden for him. We'll talk a little bit about that later at the break, what things we can do to enter into what he is doing and what we also can be doing regarding Common Core. But would you please give a warm welcome to a professor and a brother, Dr. Duke Pesta.
I'm a little peripatetic. I can't stand still, so this will be better for you. Can you hear me all okay? All right. And if anybody, I know a lot of you, this is like my college classrooms. A lot of people sit in the back and on the sides. If for some reason we'll have some slides up here, you may be a little better able to see if you get a little more central. If you want to do that, if you feel the need to, don't hesitate. A couple things. We need a quick hand for our MC, please, who's giving his time to do this. I appreciate that. Couple things I like to start with by way of disclaimers. That's right, this is my 219th Common Core talk in 33 states over the last 13 months. We've been doing this because it's necessary. And I hope you'll still applaud after I tell you what I'm going to tell you next. I didn't intend for this to happen. I got involved, I'm a Roman Catholic myself, I got involved because in the Green Bay Archdiocese, Roman Catholic schools took Common Core, never informed their students, never informed the teachers, never informed the moms and dads. We had 5 bishops in Wisconsin. A year ago, all 5 of those bishops had Common Core in their schools, and not one of them knew what it was. All right? So I started giving talks here and there to Catholic moms and dads who were confused about this, and it got bigger and bigger. I'm not sure if I had to do it over again, I would have. It's a big commitment. We're happy to do it, but this is important. This is missionary work. Common Core, I hope you'll see by the end of the night, Common Core is not one of those topics that you can do bullet points. As a matter of fact, the people who are for Common Core give you nothing but bullet points. I'm going to explode those bullet points tonight, but you can't do it in 30 minutes. And I want to say something else. There are hundreds of people like me who are going across the country and talking about the dangers of this. Professors and teachers, authors and scholars, right? Doing this all across the country and doing it largely out of the goodness of their hearts. This is not a rapacious thing. You know what you can't find? You really can't find the people who defend Common Core to get up and do this, do you? You can't do that. They don't. The irony is that, and we've invited them to debate, we've invited them to share the stage with us, they want no part of this. If what we're going to tell you today is so transparently foolish, they should be able to stand up here and absolutely make mincemeat of this, but they don't do it. You know, they don't have to do it because it was put in place in states like South Dakota without anybody knowing how it got here. It became the educational law of South Dakota without anybody being consulted. So the people who support it don't have to defend it. Eldon mentioned dialogue, right? The people who support this have not had much to say about it from the beginning right up until now. And I honestly believe, and I hope you will see when we're done, that they don't have much to say about it because when you understand what Common Core is, it's really not defensible, or they'd be here defending themselves. And that's what I want to start with. I also want to say it's really important for me to point out to you that Common Core is a hugely bipartisan problem. You will see before we're done today, there's all sorts of blame, and it goes all across the political spectrum. In fact, Common Core isn't even really a political issue. The people who support it are supporting it for a variety of reasons. Politics is one of them. Money is a much bigger reason. But you will see by the time we're done today, very bipartisan explanation of what's going on here. So I think that's important as well. I am going to we'll have a 10-minute break about an hour into the presentation and come back and do the second half. So people will be able to get some refreshment, use the restroom. Anybody has to leave can leave. We also need our cameraman here to change his tape. So we'll do that and give you a little break, a respite from it. I would have one other request from you. Please, we have a big room here. Common Core is a complicated topic. I respectfully ask that you hold your questions and comments till the end. I'll stay as long as I have to answer your questions. I promise you I will. No one will get cut out. But if we start allowing questions during the talk, an hour 45-minute talk is going to become a 4-hour talk. And I want to be respectful of your time and not keep you here till midnight. So let me get through it, and I will stay and answer any questions that you have as democratically as I possibly can, okay? And then finally, here's where we begin. Allow me to ask you one question with a simple show of hands. As you sit here today, raise your hand if you are still fuzzy about Common Core, not quite sure what it is or where it came. Would you raise your hand, please? And would everybody just take a moment and look around the room? That's 90% of you here. Common Core has been around for 5 years. It's been in your schools really about 2.5 years now. In other states in the Union, like New York, Florida, Kentucky, they've had it for 3.5 years. Almost all of our schools' textbooks have gone to Common Core textbooks. All this has happened. In these 219 talks I've given in these 33 states, I've probably talked to about 120,000 Americans. It's not that big of a deal, statistically insignificant. But it has been the same every place I've been. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows where it came from. How in the world did we get ourselves in a situation where American education is being transformed, and 3 years in, we still don't know what it is? It's because the people who did it don't want you to know. They orchestrated this in such a way that you wouldn't know, and they're hoping it's too far in your schools for you to pull it out now. Any of you who have been working on Common Core starting to hear the argument, well, we've spent so much money on it already. Well, I mean, gee, we bought the textbooks. Yeah, that's by design. All right, so I want you to remember the show of hands and where we start today with Common Core. So what is Common Core? Given that I want to start in a very basic sense, what is Common Core? Common Core is an abbreviated term used to refer to the Common Core State Standards Initiative, a set of national standards for English and mathematics with science and history curriculum coming next. And this is important. Common Core intends to have every single aspect of your school Common Core, including Common Core physical education, Common Core music, Common Core art. By the time they're done, if they're not stopped, everything will be Common Core aligned. And the shocking thing, before we're even one sentence into this, they call it the Common Core State Standards. Now that would lead you to believe that this is a state-led initiative. Myth number one. Over and over again, the talking points from the people who support this. It's a state-led effort. It's a state-led effort. And look at the title, the Common Core State Standards. Well, here's a fact. Oh, and as I'm going to start giving you facts, I want to promise you one thing. Every single slide you see today, every single piece of information I will give you free. You can have it. I want you to have it. I beg you. You take all these slides, email us, we'll give them to you free of charge. You take these slides and you verify me. And if you do that, that's a big deal. Then you're going to have this information yourself. 95% of what you're going to hear today isn't even from me. I'm going to put it into the voices of the people who were there and are going to tell you this. You can have this information for your own records. So when I tell you, I want you to look this up. They call them the Common Core State Standards. The fact is that nobody in the states got to look at Common Core until after they had been conceived, paid for, drafted, validated, and inserted in 45 states through Race to the Top. Only after that happened, lock, stock, and barrel done deal, did people at the state levels, teachers, actually get to review the standards. Were these teachers able to change the standards? Nope. Were they able to suggest changes? No. Did they have any ability to reject the standards? Absolutely not. When your teachers, the very small number of teachers in your state who got to review them, when they did it, it was a fait accompli. It was a courtesy. That's the reality about Common Core. So why do they call it the Common Core State Standards Initiative? Well, if you've been paying attention to government for the last 30, 40 years with Republicans and Democrats, whenever you want to do some kind of big government movement, you always give it a name, right? Why do they call the Affordable Care Act affordable? But how many people do you know who, when you give it a name like that, well, it's got to be good. If they say it as it has to be. Or how about this one? If you don't support the latest radical feminist agenda on abortion, it's a war on women, isn't it? All right? This language manipulation. You're going to see very quickly just how much language manipulation there is in Common Core. Again, if we're wrong and this is so transparent, why are they playing games with names? Why are they playing games with how? As a matter of fact, Common Core is branding so badly. The words Common Core are branding so badly that the forthcoming standards that aren't English and math, they've changed the names of those standards. So Common Core Science isn't called Common Core Science. It is now called the Next Generation Science Standards. And if you can find them online. And if you look at them, look at the first 40 pages of introductory material. Common Core appears 60 different times. They just figured, if we change, you don't like Common Core, so we'll change the name now. And they wouldn't keep doing that, by the way, if it didn't work, if people didn't fall for it. So this is the second thing you need to keep in mind, right? The new standards that are coming out, and they're really, really dangerous. We'll talk a little bit about science later. But the science standards that are coming out, the names have been changed. Where'd we get them from? They were written and copyrighted, these standards, by 2 Washington lobbyist groups. I would like to reemphasize for you this. The people who wrote the standards and copyrighted them, and I'm going to skip ahead. There's your copyright. The copyright for the standards, the educational standards that are transforming American education are not owned by the Department of Education. They are not owned by the Congress of the United States. They are not owned by your governors. They are not owned by the teachers or the teachers' unions. They're not owned by the moms and dads. This transformational curriculum and the standards and the curriculum that comes with it is owned exclusively by people utterly unaccountable to the taxpayers and the voters. Even if you think you like Common Core, even if you think the standards are a fantastic idea, how in the world do we countenance this? The NGA Center and the CCSSO shall be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the Common Core state standards, and no claims to the contrary shall be made. How did this is Banana Republic stuff, isn't it? Education, public education is arguably as serious an issue as healthcare in this country. And for the people to be making this policy what happens if South Dakota doesn't like Common Core? How do you get rid of it now? Who do you unelect? You can't unelect these people. Go back for a second. Who is the NGA? Well, the NGA is the National Governors Association. Well, now wait a second here, right? Let's talk a little bit about language. When we hear the National Governors Association, this is bullet talking point 2 of Common Core. The standards are state-led. No, they're not. They're totally top-down. If they were state-led, then what happened to Indiana wouldn't have happened. Remember about 8 months ago when Indiana pulled out? If these standards are state-led and the states can do whatever they want, well, Indiana said 8 months ago they became the first state to pull out. And the federal government said to them, well, you can pull out, but if you do, we will withhold your entire $224 million federal education budget for your state. Does that sound to you like the states have a lot of opportunity? And let's talk about the National Governors Association. I think when you hear that, the NGA, you conjure up this image, don't you? Of 50 state governors locking themselves in a room and banging out education standards, because that's one of the myth talking points of the Common Core, that this is state-led, this is a governor's initiative. Do you know who the NGA is? The NGA is a self-described lobbying, K Street lobbyist group, whose job it is to put lobbyists and activists in the presence of politicians and their aides to help move the discussion. I'll give you an example. Does anybody know who the sitting chair of the NGA is right now? Not Michael Bloomberg, Governor Mary Fallin of Oklahoma. So the NGA created these standards. All the governors are behind it. Well, that's interesting because the chair of the NGA, the governor of Oklahoma, a month and a half ago pulled Oklahoma completely out of Common Core. Do you understand now what we say when the governors had nothing to do with this? And I'll go one step further. I would rather your 50 governors did this, but I'm going to ask you a question. What possible experience does your governor have to write education standards? I've got Governor Scott Walker, one of the most reliably conservative governors in the country. What experience does he have? Nothing, zero. But why would I rather have had the governors do it than the people who did it? Because you can vote a governor out of office, can't you? You can't vote these guys out of office. National Governors Association and the CCSSO. Well, where'd they get the money to do this? Well, back in 2009, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation ponied up initially $150 million in 2008 to pay the people who wrote the standards. As we sit here today, 5 years later, Gates Foundation has spent $4 billion on Common Core. And all that money has gone to organizations that have agreed to support it. Take the Fordham Institute. The single most, really the only serious conservative organization that supports Common Core is Fordham. Fordham has received $6 million in grants from the Gates Foundation precisely to advertise Common Core in the last 3 years. Do you know that the National Parent Teachers Association, the National PTA, even before the Common Core standards were written, the National PTA received million-dollar grants from the Gates Foundation to begin advocating for Common Core before the National PTA had even seen what it was? Do you know why 176 Roman Catholic diocese schools got involved with Common Core without even being asked to the very first semester it was available? Well, how about the NCEA, the National Catholic Education Association, the largest Catholic watchdog education group? They've received hundreds of thousands of dollars from Bill Gates to advocate and promote for Common Core. Because the Gates Foundation is a public charitable organization, you can see they are mandated to post all their donations online. Some of you are taking notes, that's fantastic. You want to be blown away? Simply type in Gates Foundation Common Core money into Google. You will see where every penny, it's like a 60-page document, every penny of that $4 billion went. Every single organization who supports Common Core is on the list of what that took money. You will not find a single major or even minor educational institution who didn't take money who supports Common Core. You can find that online really easily. So that's what Gates did. In fact, Catholic schools, right? Taken all that money from Gates to advocate for Common Core. Do you know what the only thing the Gates Foundation has spent more money on than Common Core? Abortion and population control in Africa, right? That's where we sit. So Bill and Melinda Gates put that money up. That's the first part of the story. Question becomes this. For all Bill Gates' money, how in the world did they get this in your public schools? I'll go one step further. For those taking notes, there's an article I would love for you to look at. It's by Joy Pullman, Pullman. Joy has written the definitive article tracing the authorship of Common Core to 5 individuals in those 2 groups. Joy's article, she's at the Heartland Institute in Chicago. Her article has been picked up by liberal media sources like the New York Times and the London Guardian and conservative press as well. Very respected across the aisle. Joy's article on the 5 authors of Common Core demonstrates conclusively that there are 5 major players, and that's it in Common Core. Chief among them is David Coleman. Have you heard that name? The New York Times called David Coleman the most powerful educational influence you've never heard of. David Coleman is the architect of Common Core. He is the man who oversaw it and contributed the most to the writing of the standards. David Coleman has never spent 1 minute as a teacher at any level. He has no teaching experience whatsoever. What experience does Bill Gates have, by the way? Isn't Gates the guy that dropped out of college to go, and good for him. I hope he makes another $1 billion. I just hope he spends it better. The fact is that the people who did this were not, as you'll see in a moment, I'll prove all this, were not educators. They had nothing to do with education. And David Coleman, you know what his chief reason for getting hired was? David Coleman was Arnie Duncan's roommate in college. That's how he got the gig. And you do know, right, that your Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, has never taught a class in his life? You know that, right? Why in the world would the president appoint a Secretary of Education who's never taught in a classroom before? You know what Arnie Duncan's whole deal is? He's a sociologist. You're going to see one of the points I'd like to make at the outset here is Common Core is not primarily an education standards, and it's not primarily education curriculum. It is primarily sociology. If you're going to do something like this, you want a sociologist to do it, don't you? Coleman has no experience doing this. And how about this for an incestuous kick in the pants? No sooner did Coleman orchestrate the writing of the standards than he immediately left Common Core and mysteriously became the CEO of the college boards, where as you sit here today, he's rewriting the SATs to conform to the standards he wrote for the Common Core people. Do you understand why I say Banana Republic stuff? The same guy who's never taught a classroom, the architect of Common Core. No sooner did he write the standards than boom, he miraculously shows up and becomes the CEO of the college boards, where he is changing the exams that every American college kid, high school kid, has to take to get into college, to conform to his curriculum standards that we still all don't know anything about. That's shocking. But even with all that, though, all those, and you know the funny thing, when you do talk to Common Core supporters, they never, ever want to talk about this. How many of you have heard, they're just standards, right? The absurdity of this, right? The idea that where they come from doesn't matter, right? It's staggering. You understand this, though, too? I don't care how much money Gates has. I don't care how many roommates Arnie Duncan appoints to high places. Do you understand that we have a federal government for the last 30 years, our federal government, whether you got Democrats or Republicans running the show, we have a federal government that is incredibly jealous of what it does. It does public education. Do you honestly believe the federal government, the Department of Education, would allow these rogues to do this and put it in your schools if they didn't want it there? As a matter of fact, how did it get there? How many of you have heard of the Race to the Top program? All right, Race to the Top. Race to the Top. You remember back in 2008 and 2009 when the president was stimulating things, car companies and banks, bailout money? He also set aside about $6 billion for schools. This was called Race to the Top. The Race to the Top program is basically a taxpayer giveaway. Every state in the union was encouraged to apply for Race to the Top money, and over the last 4 years they have been. And multiple rounds in multiple years and multiple states getting multiple grants. South Dakota got Race to the Top money. Give you an example. The state of New York in 2009 received $700 million from the Department of Education, from the federal government. And all that money went directly into their school budget. They could spend it on whatever they want. Tetherballs, computers, substitute teachers, 700 million. Do you know the only provision in Race to the Top, any state that took Race to the Top money was obligated, contractually obligated, to take the Common Core standards when they were finally written. That's how 46 states in the Union got Common Core without ever having seen it. Now you think about that for a second. You're in New York in 2009. Federal government comes to you and says, oh, apply for money. We'll give you 700 million, and all you have to do is accept a set of content standards that we haven't even written yet. That's how you got it. That's how 45 states in the Union got it. In fact, there is nothing in Common Core that could have put itself in your public schools. Bill Gates, for all his billions, has no authority to do it. It was exclusively the federal government who put it in your schools. And so you ask yourself a question. You're sounding awfully conspiratorial, Pesta. If the federal government wanted to take over education, why didn't they do it just like they did healthcare? Here's the answer. Because of a 1965 federal statute, the federal government is prohibited by law from creating national curriculum or national standards. They cannot do it. So they did the next best thing. All the 5 individuals involved with Common Core, you can see all their bios online. Jason Zimba, the man most responsible for the math standards. These are all big-time money bundlers for the president. They were put in place behind closed doors. Gates paid their salary. You can't get rid of these. How do you vote these guys out of office? Even, again, hear me when I tell you this, even if you think these standards are a great idea, how can we countenance this? And let me ask you another question. Do you think the people who support Common Core would still support it if it were exactly the same set of standards and exactly the same curriculum that grew up in the textbooks? Do you think people would support it if it was exactly the same? If instead of Bill Gates you had, I don't know, how about the Koch brothers coughing up $4 billion? And what if instead of 2 left-leaning Washington lobbyist groups, you had 2 right-leaning ones who crafted the standards behind closed doors? And what if instead of a very liberal president, you had a very conservative one who basically bribed 46 states with taxpayer money to take a set of curriculum standards that nobody had seen? I know my response would be to hate this as much as I hate it now. But do you think the people who support Common Core now, can you imagine if it was the Koch brothers? Harry Reid's head would explode all over the Senate floor. All right? So did you find a silver lining in Common Core? But you see my point, right? I'm trying to be exceedingly bipartisan here. If this happened on the other side, you get Koch money behind this, right? And you get right-wing lobbyists and conservative presidents scheming behind closed doors to do this. This would be blared on the front page of every newspaper. And yet, this is how we have it. That's pretty shocking to me. 2 legs of the stool. Common Core is a stool. And you need 3 legs for the stool to stand. Leg number 1 is the Common Core people. Leg number 2 is the federal government. And ask yourself this one more time. Do you honestly believe if this federal government in particular did not want these standards, they'd be in your schools? No way. You've seen the copyright. Leg number 1 is the Common Core Committee. Leg number 2 is the federal government. Leg number 3 is the textbook and curriculum publishers. Even before the standards were written. Let me explode myth number 3 of state-led nonsense. Right? Let me explode myth number 3 here. State-led, right, governors-led, myth number 3, that the Common Core state standards that we're talking about here, that they are somehow, what's the word I want to say? That these Common Core state standards are, where am I going with this? Think about this for a second. Yeah, the 3-legged stool. I want to phrase this in the best way without, I shouldn't waste any time thinking about it. The 3-legged stool, the curriculum of the publishing companies. Do you know who the second largest donor to Common Core is, private donor, outside of the Gates Foundation? It's Pearson Publishing. Pearson Publishing, the owner of the CEO, it's a global conglomerate. The owner of Pearson Publishing is a guy by the name of Michael Barber, a Brit. Michael Barber and Pearson Publishing, they own 100% of the Canadian textbook market. You cannot buy a textbook in Canada that's not Pearson. They now own 80% of the American textbook market. Do you know that even before the standards had been written, Pearson was working with the Common Core people to produce the textbooks to teach the standards? Here's myth number 3. That's what ran away from my head. Myth number 3 about the standards, the nature of how the standards were written. This idea somehow that have you heard this from your teachers or your schools at all? They're just standards, they're not curriculum. Have you heard that? That's absolutely untrue. Ask yourself this question. Common Core was put in your schools before I'll bet you not, in all my talks across the country, 85% of teachers I've talked about, teachers who have to teach it, they don't even know what it is. No one's been trained to do it. They didn't bother to pull anybody aside and train them. As a matter of fact, how do you train kids in Common Core when it was put in the schools before it was revealed to anybody? So what are the only tools your teachers have to teach Common Core? What are the only tools you have? The textbooks. Those textbooks just showed up in the schools. Teachers were warned they were coming. Teachers came to class one year, and boom, you got new textbooks. Your teachers were taught to teach Common Core through the textbooks. That's the curriculum. When they tell you it's just a set of standards, not a curriculum, that's the stool. You have to talk about all three of those things. They work in tandem. What the Common Core, pro-Common Core people will do will prohibit you from talking about them collectively. Oh, we don't care where it came from. Let's just talk about the standards. And break it up. Go to the copyright. They'll show you the copyright. And see, the copyright says the federal government had nothing to do with this. But then you got raised to the top, right? Which is the sole mechanism, the only mechanism by which it got put in the schools. And as I already showed you with Indiana, if this is state-led, when states try to get out, how is it that the federal government gets to withhold state funds then? So you're bribing states to take it, and you're blackmailing them if they try to get out of it. It's federal-led. And then these textbook companies. We're going to talk a lot more about Pearson moving forward. But Pearson in the last 2 years, they already own 80% of the market. In the last 2 years, Pearson has bought up 40 different small American textbook presses, paying 5 and 6 times what they're worth. They're shooting for the same monopoly. Oh, and by the way, did you know that a couple months ago, Pearson was awarded the exclusive contract to create, administer, and score all the National Common Core tests? Do you know Pearson will make $30 off every single test your kids take? Being a humble English professor, help me out. What's 30 times 60 million? Pearson. So I'm going to give you 3 separate definitions of Common Core as we move forward. Number 1, Common Core is an unholy alliance between an out-of-control federal government and a very select group of crony capitalist corporations. Take the Gates Foundation. All because they happen to be a left-wing donor group, their intentions are noble. But ask yourself this. It has been estimated that 70% of American school districts, 70, need to be upgraded a little or a whole lot to be able to do the kind of computer-based testing that Common Core requires. Whose computers do you think are going into those schools? Do you honestly think Apple computers are going into those schools? They're Dell computers? It's Microsoft. All those technology updates are Microsoft updates. There's your copyright. And so do you see, this is even better than the Affordable Care Act. If what you're looking for is national control, and education is almost as big an industry in this country as healthcare. If what you're looking for is government control, this is better. Say what you will about the Affordable Care Act. It had a hearing in the Congress, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. People heard about it. It was debated before it was. Remember Nancy Pelosi, you got to pass it to find out what's in it, right? But at least people could see parts of it. Fact is that this is just as transformational, and it had none of those things. Do you understand how this suits the purposes of the federal government better? They can point to the copyright and say, hey, we didn't do this. Yet they're paying for it. They're punishing states who want to get out of it. Right? They're threatening states. Part 2 of my talk. I'm very sincere when I tell you the only meaningful argument I have ever received from Common Core people is you're a right-wing lunatic. That's it. If you read the newspapers, if you listen to the radio, if you pay any attention to the way opponents of Common Core are portrayed, you're just right-wing Tea Party nut jobs. Okay, so I decided I'm going to quit trying to fight that. It doesn't matter what your credentials are. If you oppose Common Core, you're a loon, a right-wing loon. So let's look at some right-wing lunatics. All right, let's look at some of the right-wing lunatics who oppose Common Core. Let's start with the Department of Education's 2 top lawyers back in 2009. You understand, right? You don't get to be the top lawyer at the Department of Education in Washington if you're a raving conservative. You get that, right? The 2 chief lawyers at the Department of Education quit over Common Core, calling it a federal takeover of education and a violation of 3 federal statutes. These 2 Democrats, voting Democrats, also just wrote a book together. Came out just 3 weeks ago. I haven't had time to read it. You know what the title of their new book is, these 2 Democrats? The Coming Federal Takeover of Education. Here's what they said in 2009. In imposing the Common Core standards and the aligned assessments on the states, the federal government is violating 3 statutes and has put America on the road to a national curriculum. Think about that for a second. Notice what they do, these 2 Democrat lawyers. Besides the fact that Race to the Top, the federal program, is how it's in your schools, The second thing that makes it absolutely federal is the tests. The tests are national tests. South Dakota can't do a South Dakota test. South Dakota has to sign up for one of the national tests. All those national, there's two consortiums, Smarter Balance and PARC. All that data reports first back to the Department of Education. Do you know, in New York, there are 3 states in the Union where Common Core was rolled out early. New York, Florida, and Kentucky. They've had it for a year and a half, 2 years longer than you have. In New York, Florida, and Kentucky, they've already had 2 full years of prototype Common Core testing. In those states, student performance dropped from the 70th, 80th percentile all the way down to the 30s. All 3 states are now trying to get out of Common Core, including New York, which is as progressive as it comes, trying to get out of it. But what makes it genuinely federal is the tests. The tests belong to the federal government through Pearson. That's what they're telling you, these right-wing lawyers, right? In imposing the Common Core standards, the federal government is violating 3 statutes with respect to the race to the top Common Core scheme. Robert S. Eitel and Kent D. Talbert, former Deputy General Counsel and General Counsel, respectively, of the U.S. Department of Education, concluded that, quote, these standards and the tests will ultimately direct the course of elementary and secondary study in most states across the Union, the 46 that took it, running the risk that states become little more than administrative agents for a nationalized K-12 program and raising a fundamental question about whether the department is exceeding its statutory boundaries. Administrative agents. Let's blow up another myth here. Let's re-blow up another one. We have state and local control. We can take Common Core and we can adapt it and we can make it our own. Do you see what the 2 dumb lawyers just told you? They're exactly right about this. And I mentioned healthcare not for political reasons, simply because we have no other takeover on a national level like that in recent memory to be able to access. But you remember what happened when the healthcare law kicked in? States that signed up for the exchanges, and all 50 are supposed to, some haven't, like Wisconsin refused to. But most states have taken the exchanges, which means a state like Ohio, who took the exchange, it cannot offer you a different healthcare plan. All it does is administer the federal one. States now have ceded their authority to deal with healthcare internally in the state, because every state has different healthcare needs. You're telling me the retirement haven that is Florida has the same healthcare needs as a rugged state like of gutsy outdoorsmen like South Dakota does? Nonsense. States have lost the ability through Obamacare to be able to take care of the particular healthcare needs of their states. The states become nothing but administrative agents, secretaries and bill tax collectors for the federal government. How in the world can it not be the same if Common Core is fully implemented? If all of this is fully implemented out of Washington, how are you going to have state and local control? Right now in your schools, if you want to opt out of something, you can, a bad book's being read or a movie's being shown, you can go to your schools generally, talk to your teacher. 99 times out of 100, you can pull your kid out for the day. When Common Core is fully implemented and every subject is geared to national standards that are being tested, how in the world can you opt your kids out of things that they're going to have to be tested on nationally? Do you think your teachers are going to be allowed to do that anymore? Do you think even your Secretary of Education in the state has the authority to let your kids out? No way. Not if they're part of the national testing consortiums. You're going to have to call 1-800 Department of Education. How much Muzak do you think you're going to have to listen to before Arnie Duncan picks up the phone? State and local control, how? Right? The 2 top lawyers at the Department of Education. Help me out. I'm an English professor. I need your help. 5 words. New York State Teachers Union. Can anybody rearrange those words to make it come out right-wing tinfoil hat conservative? Can you take the words New York State Teachers Union, New York State Teachers Union, and yet here are your right-wing lunatics, and look at the date on this. January. Every slide I'm about to show you comes from this year. January 2014, January 27th. The board of New York State Teachers Union on Saturday unanimously voted to withdraw support for the Common Core standards as they are being implemented, and they demanded the firing of the individual superintendent of schools who brought it to the state. The New York State United Teachers, a union that represents more than 600,000 educational professionals in the state, is also asking the Board of Regents to remove State Education Commissioner John King from office. And although they previously backed the standards, the union says they will not support them as implemented or interpreted. That means we're not going to support them the way they are, and we're not going to support them if you change them. Those are the right-wing crazes at the New York State Teachers Union. And why do they want out? Because they've had their first tests. You think you have state control. You keep hearing from your teachers and some of your administrators, oh, we'll be able to control this. Well, how can you when the national tests kick in? Your teachers are going to find out in about 2 minutes. This is what happened in New York. The first year New York had Common Core, they taught Common Core, but a lot of the teachers spent a lot of time teaching things to counterbalance Common Core or to correct Common Core. Well, then the first test came. None of the corrections were on the test. The only thing that appeared on the test was the Common Core. Guess what all the teachers in New York had to teach the next year? Just to the test. You understand, right, that he who controls the tests controls the curriculum? Yes. The only measurement we have to assess your kids is these stupid tests. And Pearson and the federal government are writing them, not teachers. That's what the teachers union in New York is objecting to. How about this? Let's go to another right-wing organization. How about the largest teachers union in the country, the NEA? In fact, the NEA, the National Education, and this is February of 2014, the National Education Association, the NEA, it is not only the largest teachers union in the country, it is the most, now that the UAW has been tamped down, the NEA is the largest, most powerful union in the nation. They spend more on political lobbying. Just ask Governor Walker. $150 million from the NEA came into Wisconsin to try to get him out. This is the most powerful union in the country. And here's what the NEA said in February, another right-wing group. The nation's largest teachers union is pulling back on its once enthusiastic support for Common Core, labeling their rollout, quote, completely botched, unquote. National Education Association President Dennis Van Rochel said, quote, the standards will not succeed without a major course correction, including rewriting some of the standards and revising the related tests with teacher input. That's the teacher union president telling you that. The teachers, and let me defend teachers here. I'm all for accountability. This is where people on the right, conservatives, get all suckered into this, right? They buy the stupid language games. If you don't support Common Core, then you just don't want standards. Can we put that to bed? Can we put a bullet in the brain of that? You understand that education by definition is standards? That if you're giving grades and tests and quizzes, you have a standard. The idea that our schools have been standardless without this nonsense is absolutely absurd. Here's another point, too, and I'll demonstrate this in about 5 minutes. Do you know there have been 50 academic studies done in the last 40 years? 50. Most of them done by leftist professors. Not every one of those studies demonstrates that there is not even a slight correlation between a state or a nation's standards and actual classroom performance. Did you know that? There is no link whatsoever between national standards and how your kids, they're meaningless. Have any standards you want, high, low, middle. It has no impact on how your kids perform. And yet for 40 years, our only response to education has been to standardize and nationalize more. Rochel's right. Teachers had no say. When we say high stakes testing, it's not high stakes for the kids. It's high stakes for the teachers. If the teachers don't get their kids to that standard, whatever it is, they may not get reappointed. You're a principal of one of those schools and your school falls below the standards, you can be reassigned. That's the high stakes. How can you hold teachers responsible for tests they didn't write, tests they do not get to grade, and in New York, I'll show you this in a moment too, the New York English test that they took for Common Core last year, after they were graded, the teachers were not allowed to see the tests. So the teachers have no idea what questions the kids got wrong. The teachers never saw the tests. I'll show you that in a second. That's the NEA. How about this? The second largest teachers union in the country, the American Federation of Teachers, the AFT, and this is July, this is last month. And by the way, I know we all recognize that the NEA is a pretty left-leaning group. The AFT makes the NEA look like Mr. Rogers' conservative neighborhood. This is the radical teachers union in the country, the second largest. In a major surprise, the American Federation of Teachers, the country's second largest union, opened its convention Friday in July by announcing a step back from support for Common Core. AFT will now they're providing monetary grants for teachers who want to criticize or even entirely write new standards. The AFT's Executive Council is also introducing a resolution to declare that the standards may have had noble intentions, but they have fallen short due to outside meddling and an inordinate focus on standardized tests. That's the AFT. By the way, the article goes on to say, CCS, Common Core, has also seen other opposition on the left as well, particularly from a new faction of almost 100,000 left-wing teachers who have called themselves the Badass Teachers Association. All of those members are also part of the AFT. So when you hear teachers, because have you heard this? Our teachers love Common Core. Have you gone in and talked to a superintendent or principal? I don't know what you're talking about. Our teachers love that. How many of you have also encountered, I know a lot of people have talked about this. Eldon mentioned this. I've encountered this in every state I've been to. Teachers are under gag orders. Do you know, in the 100-something thousand people I've talked to, I must have talked to at least 1,000 teachers, and they've all said the same thing. If my principal knew I was at your talk, I'd be fired. If this is so transparent and obvious, why are they putting gag orders on teachers? I've got a letter. This is in a Catholic school in Green Bay. I've got a letter from a Catholic principal to his Catholic teachers. He made the mistake of sending it out on email. Got the letter sitting at home. He basically threatens any teacher who attends. He says, you have the right to free speech. You can be against Common Core, you're just not allowed to talk about it. If I catch any of my teachers attending talks or attending advocacy groups, they will lose their jobs. These are the threats teachers are under. We'll show you this too. So you got this. How about, this is my favorite. How about the Chicago Teachers Union? Barack Obama's own backyard. The Chicago Teachers Union is just downright nuts. This is the teachers union that 5 years ago, the CTU, they approved a curriculum that would begin the teaching of masturbation techniques to 5-year-olds, kindergartners. Do you know who the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union, brought to speak to all the little kids on Martin Luther King Day? Jeremiah Wright. Remember him? Goddamn America? Yeah, that's who the CTU brought to talk to elementary school kids. This is Karen Lewis right here. Karen Lewis, the CTU president, May of this year. You look up, you taking notes, look up Karen Lewis on Wikipedia. She's the kind of, if you went up to Karen Lewis and said, hey Karen, nice to meet you, you're to the left of Bill Ayers, she would say, thank you. She is absolutely a committed leftist. Here's what she said in May about Common Core, direct quote. I agree with educators and parents from across the country. The Common Core mandate represents an overreach of federal power into personal privacy, as well as into state educational autonomy. Remember data mining? This is a huge overreach by the feds into data about your kids. And also there's your local control, superintendents. She's telling you, the Chicago Teachers Union president. This is a huge imposition into state educational autonomy. She goes on to say, Common Core eliminates creativity in the classroom and impedes collaboration. We also know that high-stakes standardized testing is designed to rank and sort our children, and it contributes significantly to racial discrimination and the achievement gap in America's schools. And she's right. You know where the biggest agreement on the left and right about Common Core is? On what it does to special needs kids and what it does to already struggling schools, primarily inner city schools and primarily minority schools, students who are already behind. You know, I've been saying this for a year and they call me a kook. There's your right-wingers. Because the only argument, when you go press your teachers and your superintendents and a lot of your benighted politicians, when you go press them about this, they're going to hit you with that. If they can't, they won't argue any of this because they can't, and then they're going to chalk it up to you're a right-wing lunatic. Show them who the right-wingers are. How about this? Not only did the CTU, Chicago Teachers Union, unanimously pull out, the whole union wrote a series of 30 anti-Common Core resolutions. I can't read them all for you here. They're online. I'll just read you a couple. How about this one? The CTU resolution declares that, quote, instructional and curricular decisions should be in the hands of classroom professionals who understand the context and interests of their students. Duh, right? Common Core should be, curriculum and standards should be developed by educational professionals. This was not. And it says, quote, the education of children should be grounded in developmentally appropriate practice. Eldon hit on this. Why in the world is there so much graphic violence, so much shockingly inappropriate sexuality in the books, in the Common Core textbooks? What's it doing there? She's telling you. This is the woman who okayed masturbation for 5-year-olds, telling you that Common Core is developmentally inappropriate for your kids. That's a heck of a statement, isn't it? How about this? Common Core standards were developed by, quote, non-practitioners, including test and curriculum publishers, and education reform foundations, such as the Gates and Broad foundations, right? As a result, quote, the standards better reflect the interests and priorities of corporate education reformers than the best interests and priorities of students and teachers. Teachers had nothing to do with this. And if you don't like me for my right-wing bona fides, listen, who's telling you this? How about this? How about Salon.com, the uber leftist website, and uber leftist writer Michael Mazenko, who in July of this year, 1 month ago, took after Common Core in words that made me proud. Here's what he says, quote, "The underreported story about Common Core is the millions of dollars to be made in developing and selling educational materials and tests linked to the new standards. Despite, listen to this, despite claims by Common Core advocates that standards are not curriculum, school districts are realizing they need to spend money on new materials and training to meet the new in other words, the curriculum, the only thing that you can buy to learn Common Core is what they're selling you, the people who wrote it. The standards are the curriculum. And if you don't like me telling you it, this guy's if we're right-wing lunatics, this guy's a left-wing lunatic, right? School districts are realizing they need to spend money on new materials and training to meet these standards, especially if schools are required to use standardized tests to measure student growth and teacher accountability. And the whole point of Common Core is to make every school in the country accountable for standardized testing. He says, without doubt, the implementation of Common Core will cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and the U.S. Department of Education has already given, and if it's not a federal curriculum, why in the world is the Department of Education doing this? The Department of Education has already given $350 million to education companies like Pearson to develop curriculum. So we're paying Pearson to write textbooks that Pearson then gets to sell and make money on. Think about that for a second. We're paying them to write Common Core textbooks, then they sell the Common Core textbooks, and they keep that money. You understand what we mean by crony capitalism now, right? Clearly, the Common Core has been incredibly lucrative for businesses, while the benefits to students remain dubious at best. We're almost done with this segment here, okay? How about this? Brand new Stanford, Hoover Institute, Stanford University, Harvard Kennedy School Program on Education Policy poll, done 3 weeks ago. New poll by 3 big-time lefty universities. 40% of teachers, 40% in a recent poll, now oppose Common Core standards versus only 12% who opposed it 1 year ago. Why are they opposing it now when they were so for it? Because now they're beginning to see what they have to do, what the textbooks look like. Only 46% now back Common Core compared to 76% 1 year ago. How about this? A Gallup poll came out about a month ago too on this. Last year, Common Core meant little to the American public. But today, a majority of people are familiar with the standards, and most of them oppose the initiative touted by the Obama administration, a new survey shows. The results of an annual poll by Gallup provides more evidence that support for Common Core has faded. The survey showed that those who oppose the standards thought that the Common Core will hurt teachers' ability to craft lessons that will be best for students. The poll also showed that 68% of public school parents believe the standardized tests are not helpful for teachers in measuring student achievement. Last year, 1 year ago, more than 2/3 of respondents in the poll had never heard of Common Core. This year, more than 80% of Americans had at least heard of the standards. A total of 60% already say they oppose them. This is a big deal. Even as you're being told, I know you are because your state's like mine, even as you're being told, this is working now, everyone's on board, we're starting to get this rolling. Nonsense, it's just absolute spin. Why don't we, I know you got to do a change, right? All right, so what I'd like to do is give you your we're about halfway through. Take your 10-minute break now. His change is real. We'll finish this segment up and then we'll roll downhill. And a quick word about the donations. We don't charge a speaker fee. We're here because people in South Dakota have paid for plane tickets and hotel rooms. So if you do have the ability to throw a couple bucks in to help reimburse them, that makes a big difference. So we appreciate that too. All right, back we go. And it's going to get, that was the warm-up. I think it's going to start to really get kind of interesting now. Before we're done, and we're almost done with this segment, you see what I want you to recognize what I've done. You see, right, that 98% of what you've heard here today so far didn't even come from me. You see, we're talking about lawyers, we're talking about teachers' unions, we're talking about teachers' union presidents, right? I've got a couple more of these to do. And again, I am deadly serious when I tell you, the only serious challenge to this information I have ever received is you're a right-wing lunatic. That's it. That's it. They just dismiss you. And I've talked to a number of you who have come up to me before and after who've been written off just because, well, if you disagree, we can't talk to you, you're a right-wing crazy. I want you to see who's doing this. And I've got this young man. It's important to see. I got a little my first little video clip from you. This is Joshua Katz, a self-described liberal progressive. He is a high school math teacher from Orange County in Florida. He is doing what I'm doing. He's traveling the country, speaking and warning kids about, moms and dads about Common Core. Now, he has some really fascinating things to say, and I'd like to play a short clip from Mr. Katz that will solidify everything we've just said in the first hour.
Our toxic culture of education begins with a classic supervillain archetype. I focus on Syndrome from The Incredibles. The supervillain's plan is to unleash a doom onto the world that only the supervillain can stop, thus gaining all the desired power. Now, this is exactly what happened in education in the 1980s and before, and then culminated in No Child Left Behind. Private education companies realized they could use public education, a multi-billion-dollar industry, to create a nearly endless stream of taxpayer money. They channeled millions of dollars into lobbying efforts and focused on two words, rigor and accountability, and put everything into place. State statutes were passed, district rules were enforced, and then finally No Child Left Behind became the national standard. Don't get me wrong about politics. These efforts were underway long before they were passed, so both parties get to take full credit for their disastrous results, especially with Race to the Top. We somehow took the education system that produced the individuals who put a man on the moon with technology less powerful than the phone in my pocket and characterized that education system as a failure, using the word accountability. We only have one way to address accountability: standardized testing. So we implemented standardized testing, and then a 1983 publication called A Nation at Risk showed standardized tests proved schools were failing, teachers were failing, students were failing, and when everything is failing, guess what we need? New textbooks, new workbooks, new resources, new training, accountability systems, new schools, private schools, charter schools, and who is it that creates all of these things that all of a sudden we need? Our supervillain, private education companies. The only way to feed a business model in this toxic culture of education is to perpetuate a picture of failure. I would love to meet any education company that has a business model that is built upon long-term student success. There simply is no money in long-term student success. Now, how is it that we can believe that a standardized test is what accurately measures student achievement? How can we believe that it measures student growth? That moment when the student's light bulb is finally lit, aha. That moment when a student says, thank you for helping them graduate with a 2.0 GPA. How can we attach a number to that moment when a third grader finally has the ability to write his own name? Who, by the way, has been labeled a failure for himself, his teacher, and his school. Yet we crave education standardization. We believe we need these high-stakes tests because we eat up the misinformation provided by these companies and policies using a false validity of their testing results. Our testing culture begins in elementary school. Colleagues of mine work with third graders who suffer from anxiety from high-stakes testing. From a one-day, one-shot, 4-hour computer-based test, the future path of a student is set, an academic identity is established, and a message is delivered loud and clear: either you can or you can't make it. And no matter what the teacher tells the student about how good they are or what talents they have, if the student doesn't score well on that high-stakes test, the third graders know exactly what it means and begin to define themselves. And it's starting to happen now in kindergarten. So we continue this barrage of standardized tests, and the students continue failing, and the districts have to continue the next initiatives that can solve the problems. Who is it that manufactures these products? Who creates these solutions? Our supervillain, Private companies like Pearson and McGraw-Hill, who operate off policy and legislation written by nonprofit organizations and lobbying groups like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. The Common Core will do even more damage because of its emphasis on high-stakes testing matched with its myopic standards that are disguised in critical thinking. I've seen my daughter's kindergarten and first grade assignments. This isn't critical thinking. This is developmentally inappropriate rote. You think they could fool me with this stuff? Any education reform that doesn't address high-stakes testing and the non-cognitive factors of true success like character and integrity is a complete waste of time, and it's killing our kids.
Yeah, and it's killing our kids. A lot of what he said is right. Now, this is interesting. I'll tell you one thing off the bat I disagree with him on. It's very typically progressive thinking. Do you notice who the supervillain is? The education companies. Hey, you've heard me criticize them big time, but you get it, right? The education companies would have no power to put this in your schools without the federal government. You get that, right? So you understand the difference between the conservative and the liberal on this, right? He's exactly right about much of what he said, and a couple of shocking things. That was a staggering point. I wanted you to hear it from him. Our schools were not failing. Up and through the 70s, these were the greatest schools in the world. What he said, we put a man on the moon with less technology than your cell phones. And when we characterized, in the early 1980s, we characterized that entire education system as a failure. Who did that? The moms and dads didn't. The teachers didn't do it. Our kids didn't suddenly start failing tests. It was these education companies who realized that billions and billions and billions of taxpayer money goes into the schools every year. They wanted their share. So they created the tests that, lo and behold, proved our kids were failing. And most of you are close to my age. You know what's happened. Every 5 years we get a whole new thing. Remember new math? We've been doing math the same way for 2,500 years. It's given us Archimedes and Newton and Galileo and Einstein. And in the last 40 years, we've changed it 7 different times. And every time our kids' math standards go down, 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 we want more standardization. He's exactly right about that. And did you hear what he said about the developmentally inappropriate? I've seen my 5-year-old's assignment. They are developmentally, graphically inappropriate for kids, right? He and I would agree on next to nothing, I'm sure. But what he says is pretty powerful stuff, right? There's another right-wing lunatic. How about this? Take it from the man himself. You want to listen to how about the guy who paid for it? How about Bill Gates? He said this in 2009, 5 years ago. And for 5 years, you're being told by your schools that they're just standards, that we have state and local control. Listen to what he said. When the tests are aligned to the standards, the curriculum will line up as well. That strikes me as a threat. He just told you what the end game is. You haven't had your first tests yet in South Dakota. You're going to get them this spring. This is going to get really interesting. There are a lot of people asleep who will, when those test scores hit in the spring, that's what happened in New York and Florida. And Florida, the governor of Florida got a law through the Congress, the state legislature, that no national testing organizations can come into Florida and test Florida kids, precisely because of this. I want you to pay attention. This is the man telling. This isn't me. It's not even the liberals I've shown you so far. This is the bankroller, the ideological bankroller of Common Core telling you that once we get our tests into your schools, your teachers will have to teach exclusively, explicitly, and only what is on those tests. Where's your local control? Where's your local freedom? Now do you see why teachers' unions, and shame on them for having to suffer through it before they figured it out. Because the teachers' unions have been doing this for 40 years. Standardized tests, they were all on board for No Child Left Behind at first, and now they hate it. Same thing is happening here. Listen to what he tells you. How about this? I mentioned 50 reports in 40 years, proving that there is not a single link between a standard and how your kid performs. They are meaningless. And the bigger the standard, the more meaningless they are. You know the only standards that work every single time? A committed parent, a disciplined child, and a solid teacher. That's how kids learn. And you see how this is as opposite of that as it conceivably. This is so top down. This is what we've done. Every time these standards fail, we make bigger, more comprehensive, more federal standards. Common Core is the end game. We got rid of, you remember what came before Common Core was No Child Left Behind. And in the spirit of bipartisanship, who gave us No Child Left Behind? Yeah, George Bush. But you know, Bush didn't write the standards. He's supposed to be this evil arch-conservative George Bush. Who did he allow to write the education bill completely, No Child Left Behind? Ted Kennedy. Do you remember after Teddy Kennedy wrote them, the Bushes had the Kennedys over at the White House for popcorn and movies? George Bush turned over the complete writing of the educational paradigm known as No Child Left Behind, the first attempt at national standards. He turned it over to Teddy Kennedy. It's been a disaster. I have never yet met a teacher, a principal, a superintendent who has anything but contempt for No Child Left Behind. And why do they hate it? They hate the standardized testing. They hate the one-size-fits-all education. All right? How many of you got kids or grandkids? Which is to say all of you. Can you get your 3 daughters and your 5 grandkids, can you get your kids and grandkids to do exactly the same in all the different subject areas across the board? Hey, you laugh, right? And if you can't do it with your 3 kids, how in the world are you going to do it with 60 million American school kids? It's absurd. And do the math on this. We're all not professional educators. You're smarter than that in many respects. Answer this question for me, because the public schools haven't figured this out. If you want to get more kids to the same standard, do you ultimately have to higher the standards or lower them? How come our schools can't figure that out? That's what happened for 12 years of No Child Left Behind. Who cares what standard you start with? They always get lowered. No Child Left Behind, because what happens is the only way you can get more kids to the standard, which is the only measure of teacher hiring, of teacher tenure, of school success, of your kids' placement, is these tests. So what happens with every year that goes by and the standards get lower and lower? More kids get on them, right? This is what happened. No Child Left Behind. And here's my second. I told you I was going to give you a couple definitions. Number 1, the unholy alliance, right? Between an out-of-control federal government and a small group of crony capitalists. Definition number 2, and this is a big one here, with regards to what we're talking about, these standards, this notion that Common Core is, these standards, that standardized testing is the way to go. Common Core is No Child Left Behind on steroids. The worst aspects of No Child Left Behind, the one-size-fits-all, much broader. This high-stakes testing, you know, in Wisconsin, they've set aside 6 weeks to test kids in the spring semester. You remember when you and I were in school? I remember taking the Iowa Basics one day in March, and that was the end of it. These kids are, and what he told you is exactly right. They're bringing this high-stakes testing down to kindergarten. They're putting 5-year-olds in front of computers and making them do Common Core tests. They intend to do this across the board. That's your second definition. All the worst aspects of No Child Left Behind are back in Common Core. In fact, the only difference is it's more federalized, it's more nationalized, and what was it that killed No Child Left Behind? It wasn't the federal government saying, hey, we made a mistake, let's give it back. That never happened. No Child Left Behind was killed precisely because it allowed too much state and local control. Working teachers and working classrooms and working moms and dads knew it wasn't working. So No Child Left Behind was killed from the ground up. One of the bugs Common Core kills is that'll never happen again. If just like with the healthcare, if this gets fully implemented, you can't pull it out again. That's the big difference between Common Core and No Child Left Behind. All that state and local control that allowed teachers to protest and revolt, that's gone from this now. That, under No Child Left Behind, nobody issued teachers a gag order saying you can't go listen to anti-No Child Left Behind speeches. They're doing that in Common Core as a way of cementing this. Now listen to this. This is the Brown Center Report on American Education. 50 studies in 40 years. This is the latest one done about 4 months ago. This was done by the Brookings Institute, a left-leaning think tank. This is also the most comprehensive study. The Brown Center Report from the Brookings Institute, here's their conclusion of all their research. What effect will the Common Core have on national achievement? The analysis presented here suggests very little impact. The quality of Common Core standards is currently being hotly debated, but the quality of past curriculum standards has been unrelated to achievement. The rigor of performance standards, is how high the bar is set, has also been unrelated to achievement. And I know this is where the right gets suckered in. Standards, achievement, right, I understand it. But the point is that these kind of national standards aren't a standard at all. And every time they get put in place, they get radically lowered to bring more kids in. So this is what you're dealing with. The Brown Center report makes that clear. Even liberal comedians are mocking this. I mean, remember, what have we done for the last 45 minutes? It's a sad commentary. We live in a culture where unless you have a left-wing worldview, no one wants to take you seriously. Not in academia, not in media, not in journalism. You could say the exact same thing. If you got a D by your name, suddenly you're an expert. If you're anybody else, you're crazy. It tells you something that comedians like Colbert and Stewart and Letterman, all three of them, uber liberals, Stewart, Letterman, within the last 3 months, they have had half-hour segments ridiculing Common Core. Here's what Colbert said in one of his long segments, right? It turns out Common Core testing prepares our students for what they'll face as adults. Pointless stress and confusion. Right? When even Hollywood has turned on you, right? You can no longer call this a myopic right-wing issue. Oh, and before we leave our little tour of the right-wing crazies who oppose Common Core, I want to leave you. It's amusing at times, it's sobering, but it's also frightening. Here's the leader of one of America's major teachers' union, the UFT in New York. Here's what he said 1 week ago about people wanting to get rid of the Common Core standards.
If someone takes something from me, I'm gonna grab it right back out of that cold, twisted, sick hand and say it is mine. You can't take what is mine. And I'm gonna punch you in the face and push you in the dirt. Because this is the teacher. These are our tools. And you sick people need to be away from us and the children that we teach. Thank you very much.
I mean, union thuggery is union thuggery, right? And it doesn't apply. I'm not talking about the hardworking men and women who work in them. I'm talking about the leadership, particularly of teachers' unions. But that's a pretty sobering thing. Did you notice what he did do? He never talks about the kids and the moms and dads. There are standards. You crazy, sick, demented people aren't going to take. You try to take my standards from me, I'm going to take them out of your sick, twisted hands, he said. I'm going to punch you in the face and put you in the mud. Because we're the teachers. These are our standards we use to teach our kids. You notice who's excluded from the entire exchange? You. The kids don't belong to you, they belong to them. These are our standards and we want them, right? This is also serious. It really is this was 1 week ago. And you heard the cacophony of teachers, right? At least union allied teachers screaming and cattering in the background, laughing at his hijinks. All right. You need one last little history lesson as we go downhill. Promise it's the last one. The Common Core did something you might think was a good idea. Way back in 2009, before anybody knew what it was, they had already written the standards, before any states had seen them. Gates had already paid for them. After they had written them, paid for them, and drafted them, they hired a committee of 29 people from across the country to come to Washington, D.C. to validate the standards. This was called the Validation Committee. 29 experts were hired. They were given absolute carte blanche to throw the standards out completely, to rewrite anything they wanted to rewrite, to do whatever they had to do. Told, you do your job, we won't harass you. The interesting thing about that committee of 29, they brought exactly one math specialist and one English specialist for the math. That's it. There were about 14 different activists, political activists on the committee with no educational experience. There were mid-level middle school teachers of math, and this is no insult. If you teach middle school math, that's fantastic. We need good middle school math teachers, but you understand, right? Being able to teach 6th grade math does not enable you to write a national math standard. In order to be, and this is why it's so important to know the background of Coleman and Arne Duncan, right? If you're going to write a national standard, that requires a tremendous amount of math. It requires a tremendous, as the math specialist on the committee said, there are 22 mathematicians in the country who could do it. That's it. There are 22 mathematicians in the United States who have sufficient mathematics to be able to craft a national standard in math. His name, the one math professor they brought in, Professor James Milgram, retired professor, Stanford University math. He's a serious guy. Milgram did most of the math calculations for the Apollo moonshot in the late 1960s. Most of the math was his. He also is a registered Democrat. Milgram was the math specialist, the only one, and they brought in one English specialist, a woman by the name of Dr. Sandy Stotsky. Sandy is a retired professor as well. She is considered the foremost English language arts specialist in the country. Also a registered Democrat. Both Sandy and Jim voted no on the standards, voted to trash them completely. The only two people on the committee with the background to actually write standards, they voted no. They also convinced other people on the committee to vote no. Sandy said about the English standards, and I quote, "These standards in English writing and reading will set our kids 2 years behind the 2 years they're already behind the rest of the industrialized world in reading, writing, and comprehension. Milgram said, and I quote about the math standards, "It is an absolute joke to think that Common Core math will prepare your kids for STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, math, or even college-level math." I mentioned to you the name Jason Zimba, the architect of Common Core math, the man most responsible. If you type into Google when you get home, Jason Zimba, Sandy Stotsky, debate math. They had to go, it's all on film. Jason Zimba admits on TV that the Common Core math standards will not prepare your kids for college math. He admits it, the man who wrote the standards. He says, at best, the brightest of your kids might be ready for math at a 2-year technical college. Zimba said that. So what happened on the validation committee? Stotsky said no, absolutely not. Milgram said no, absolutely not. They convinced others on the committee. Well, what the Common Core Validation Committee did was write them out of the document. They just erased all comments from them, erased all input, and took the remaining 15 and validated the standards with no mention of the objections. That's why Milgram and Stotsky are both traveling the country, like I am, talking to people about it. They were in the room. I'll give you one example of this, the Common Core math standards. You know, let's explode another one of those myths about Common Core that the pro-Common Core people throw at you. Common Core math is internationally benchmarked. You heard that one? Ask them to prove it to you. Milgram's job was to go, he showed up at the committee, he said, and by the way, we brought Milgram and Stotsky to testify in Wisconsin on the legislature. At that website I'm going to give you at the end, you can go and you can watch the entire 90-minute Stotsky testimony in Wisconsin live. You can watch, on tape. You can watch all of Milgram's comments. After Milgram got done showing why this math curriculum was a disaster, the entire committee had their heads in their hands. They still haven't gotten rid of Common Core, but they got it. Right? Milgram said about the standards, as soon as he showed up there, he said, okay, you claim these standards are benchmarked. What countries did you benchmark against? And they eagerly handed him a list of 13 countries. And they were all the right countries. Sweden and South Korea, Taiwan, the countries that do math really well. Milgram said, excellent, show me your math. How'd you do it? What'd you do? For the entire month he sat on that committee, they produced not a shred of tangible evidence that they did anything else but write those names on a piece of paper. Sandy said, I am convinced they just wrote the names down. We begged them, show us something. And as you sit here today, 5 years in, nobody has ever seen the slightest piece of evidence, none, that any of this was ever measured against any other high-achieving curriculum in the world. They're lying, and the people who support it are lying, and your kids are guinea pigs. And you want the proof that they're lying? Again, don't listen to me. Type in Washington Post September Bill Gates interview. In September of last year, Bill Gates in the Washington Post said the following, and I quote, "It would be nice to know if our education standards are going to work, but it will be at least 10 years until we know." This wasn't benchmarked. They lied to you, and they're still lying to you. And when they tell you they're benchmarked, ask them to prove it. You'll get nothing from them. It's a big lie. And when you got the guy, Gates, who's behind it, telling you, we won't know for 10 years if this works, that sort of cuts the whole benchmarking argument out from under him, right? So Sandy put this together. And as an English professor myself, I understand this. Common Core English, right? The shocking, and remember the thing, when they tell you it's just standards, no, it's not. The standards, the curriculum creates the standards. It gives the teachers the only tools they have to teach those standards. Well, Common Core English, when you consider those two of the alliance between the textbooks, the curriculum, and the standards, Common Core requires that 50% of the classic literature kids have studied for 100 years in English class, literature that puts them in touch with 2,000 years of Judeo-Christian culture, literature that puts them in touch with 400 years of the American experience, that shows them both the warts and the triumphs of the American system. That's systematically removed, 50% of it at every grade level, and it's replaced with informational texts, most of which come directly from the federal government. Sandys points out that these kids, they used to discuss ethics, morals, right, in literature. That's gone, much more indoctrination. All the informational texts are one-sided. They come directly from the federal government. She points out more informational text, less classic literature. Let me show you some of the, and one more thing you need to know. This is an interesting distinction. Common Core, the standards, don't require any books to be read. But what the Common Core people did is they created a list of 450 texts that they call exemplar texts. In other words, we aren't going to require kids to read anything, but here are the only 450 texts that we approve of. What do you think the textbook companies put in their textbooks? Try to find a Common Core English textbook that doesn't include some combination of those 450. So the Common Core people said, here are the only texts we approve of. When the textbook company said that, all the textbooks have those, that's where all this pornography, which we're about to get to, comes from. Here are some of those informational texts, by the way. By the time your kid's in 9th grade in English class, they'll be exposed to, how about this one? Recommended levels of insulation. A report released in 2010 by the US EPA and the Department of Energy. I've read it. It's a 40-page regulatory document. It's nothing but Environmental Protection Agency regulations on the environmentally correct way to insulate buildings. Is this the kind of thing that's going to make your kids want to read? How about by the time your kid's in 10th grade, in English class, President Obama's own executive order 13423, strengthening federal environmental, energy, and transportation management. You're reading his presidential mandates in class. And the thing that Sandy points out, there is no balance, none. About 40% of the informational texts deal exclusively with man-made global warming, and there is no challenge to the premise. And the shocking thing about the text they're reading, there is no suggestion that any other country on earth is the problem, it's America. How about the essay, a long essay called The Evolution of the Grocery Bag? I've read it, spoiler alert, paper and plastic are both bad, and America is destroying the planet. There is no mention that countries like India or China are superseding America, none of that. It's an American problem. And there is no critical thinking, developmentally inappropriate. How about this? That begs the question. And Sandy points this out. And of what literature is left in Common Core, why is such a shocking percentage of it either graphically, violently, or sexually inappropriate? This is but one example. This is Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Great, now I gotta tell you, she's a great novelist. She won the Nobel Prize, African-American novelist. But we would not assign this book to freshmen in college. This book has been in Common Core classrooms as young as middle school, 8th graders. It's a book about a 12-year-old girl who's a victim of rape and incest. And in the course of the book, she comes to bond with her rapist and describes in the most shocking terms the nature of their encounters. I blocked out the bad words. You may not even be able to read it. But if you can see that, you get a good sense of what's in it. This book has been in 8th grade Common Core classrooms. This book has been pulled out of 24 Roman Catholic curriculum schools. And it's not like the Catholic school said, I want to buy Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. That's not how it works. The Catholic school bought Common Core English textbooks, which include segments and selections from all these books, right? And so these kids are reading that one day and they come across this stuff. And there are dozens of other books like it. Black Swan, Dreaming in Cuban, books that have shockingly scandalous pornographic stuff in it. Sandy asked the question. We need to explore. One of the reasons she voted no. Why? Why are so many of these exemplar texts out of place? Not just in the subject area Common Core put them in, but in a high school curriculum altogether. And you know one of the sad things, as Eldon pointed out, when they won't talk to you about this. When you point these books out to them, or they'll look at you like you're crazy. And they'll say, well, that's the textbooks company's problem. That's not the standards problem. Right? This insistence that you keep the things separate. But this is a big deal. I'm going to leave that question hang for about 3 minutes. We're going to come back to this. There's an answer why there is so much sex. So you're pulling out most literature, you're replacing it with government propaganda, one-sided government propaganda, and what little literature you leave in the curriculum is, as liberal Joshua Katz, as liberal Karen Lewis told you, and as me tell you, shockingly inappropriate for kids. And it's not like 3rd graders are reading pornography. But 3rd graders and 4th graders are reading shockingly inappropriate things. Even an example, 3rd grade example that went viral across the country, a Common Core question. Common Core English. Little kids were sent home in Wisconsin, and they had a Common Core assignment. You know those assignments? They give a kid a paragraph, 8 sentences in English class. They send the kid home. The kid's job in 3rd grade is to read the paragraph and then write a summary of what the main point of the paragraph is. Well, here's what the paragraph said. Janie's mom comes home from work and finds the bed not made. In making the bed, Janie's mom finds a hair beret that's not Janie's. 8 sentences later, 3rd graders, 8 and 9-year-olds, have to figure out that Janie's dad is having an affair in her mother's bed. 3rd graders. The whole paragraph builds off that. He finds a strange hair beret. So, and again, now in third grade, that's not the bluest eye. But you got third graders, right? Reading paragraphs and having to conclude from their paragraphs that the dad is having an affair in their marital bed. These are the kind of things at the lower level that kids are being exposed to. What are they doing there? We'll answer that in just a minute. But we have to spend a moment or two on the math standards, too. This is a big deal. So I asked Professor Milgram, what's the deal here? Why, if Common Core is not about math education, what would you, the words that keep coming up, this is social justice math. That's basically what Zimba said. We didn't create Common Core math to let kids excel at math. We created Common Core math so that all kids could feel good about a little bit math. Because it's not fair. Most kids, most people can't do serious math. I can't. But so what? The argument is that we would rather not have some kids excel and let everybody feel good with a little math, right? Milgram points out that in every high-achieving country, math-achieving country in the world, every one of them, kids routinely start serious algebra in 7th or even 6th grade. In No Child Left Behind America, kids didn't start serious algebra until 8th grade. And in Common Core math, algebra is pushed into high school, which means your kids, if they're not starting algebra in 9th grade, serious algebra, they cannot get calculus and advanced math anymore in high school. That's what Zimba told you. They created the math standards. As Milgram points out, at the very youngest ages, Common Core math asks things way too hard of kids that they can't do. They physically, developmentally can't do them. But as every year the kid gets older, they do less and less serious math. So by the time they're in 8th grade, 9th grade, they're doing remedial math. They're doing things that high school kids wouldn't have been doing 40 years ago they hadn't done. This is part of the problem with Common Core. And so he pointed me to this video, and you cannot make this up. The woman in this video, she is a community organizer from Chicago. And she's talking to a group of Illinois high school math teachers. And Milgram says, this is it. This is the philosophy of Common Core math.
But even under the new Common Core, even if they said 3 times 4 was 11, if they were able to explain their reasoning and explain how they came up with their answer really in words and oral explanations, and they showed it in the picture, but they just got the final number wrong, we're really more focusing on the how and the way we...
And that's it. To be fair to her, she's asked a couple, the incredulous teachers ask, but please tell us right answers matter, and she says, they do, but not as much as the process. One of the main ways Common Core math is done in elementary school is the so-called parent share program, where they put kids in groups of 2s and 3s. Teachers don't teach math. They put kids in groups of 2s and 3s, and the teachers hand them math problems. The purpose of the assignment is not to get the right answer. The purpose of the assignment is to get all 3 kids in the group to agree on what they think the answer is. I have an actual test from the state of New York. They've had their tests already. An actual test from the state of New York, where a 3rd grade boy, the question was 7 times 6. He wrote 42. Right next to it, marked wrong, and in red pencil, the teacher writes, the other 2 students in your peer group agreed on a different number, so they got it correct. You did not agree, and so this kid got it marked wrong. Another little boy, it was a 4th grader, had an addition problem, and the answer to the problem was 111. He wrote 111. He got it marked wrong because he did not draw the 111 circles he was required to draw to answer the question. And if you want to think about this for a second, take a look at this. If you've been paying attention, if you type in goofy Common Core examples into your math examples into your Google, you'll find 100,000 of these. This is the stuff that Colbert and Letterman and Stewart are mocking as well. He pointed this video out to me, right? The professor did. This is I believe a college math professor. The mom's a college math professor. And she cannot help her 3rd grade daughter with her math homework. So she puts the little girl at the whiteboard and makes her do a simple math problem. Watch this short clip. Here's the difficult math problem. Add those 3 numbers, 1568, 1423, and 680. That's it.
So what I want you to do is, can you solve that problem showing me the way that you learned how to solve it in school? And talk to me while you're solving it.
So we learned that a big square like this is 100. So we could make that 100 into a cube, which would make 1,000. So I'm going to do.
So if a square equals 100, well then a cube equals 1,000. You notice how nobody's adding anything, right? This is what you have to do. You have to get the numbers. This is how you get the numbers on the board before you can even think of adding. The lines are 10s, the dots are 1s. And if you don't do this, you don't get credit for the problem. Do you understand how long it takes to do a math problem this way? This is why they can't get to algebra till high school. For her birthday, now you put the second number on the board.
Okay.
So you could make 1,000. All of these together is 400. Now you need 600 more. So now I'm going to write the numbers down. So we have 1,000 plus, well, let's just say 3,000. Because we have 3 cubes. 3,000 plus 100. So now we can erase all these sheets and hundreds and tens. So maybe you can just add, that gives us a total of 3,760.
Okay, now listen.
Now that problem you just solved took about 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
And
Okay.
that's what they're doing in school. But at home, I'm taught how to stack. And we're not allowed to do stacking in school.
You are prohibited in Common Core from doing this stacking the way you and I learned it. You cannot do it.
These numbers, she's way
Here's how you stack. You cannot do that in Common Core classrooms.
What are you thinking? You're looking at your problems.
I got 2 different answers.
You got 2 different answers. What do you think happened?
Maybe I counted wrong.
Looks like you did the stacking correctly, and that took you about a minute.
Something messed up in this.
What do you think happened?
Well, since that one was more confusing.
Right, out of the mouths of babes, right? Now look, I do not want to be glib about this. As somebody who was a hideous math student myself, I get that some kids learn in different ways. But as Milgram points out, if you want to teach kids that way, then teach them to do the stacking math, counterintuitive, simple, direct. And then if they need more help, then do it. But they prohibit doing it that way. And I said, Professor, can you give me a single reason why they would do that? He said, yes, I can. The only reason you would do something like that is to create a math curriculum that only teachers and not moms and dads could help them with. By design. That's the social justice aspects. I told him my story because it was interesting and he agreed with me. When I was in 3rd grade, I was able to read at a high school level. So they let me in 3rd grade. I was reading Shakespeare and Dante and stuff and that was great. And that's but in 3rd grade, I had a 2nd grade math ability, and I still do. I mean, I can calculate a tip most times, and I usually over tip because math gets me, and I can pay my bills. That's it. But so what? The world needs more than CPAs, right? But the point was, I was allowed as a 3rd grader to read to suffer through math, but to do the English that I could. And by the same token, you see how this math curriculum is designed for people like me? If you put me in a group of 2 other kids in 3rd grade and say to me, get the right answer, collectively, I'm going to agree with whatever the smart kid says. If the kid who knows what he's talking about says 7 times 4 is 42 million, yeah, what he said. And if you put me at a whiteboard, how much time does that take? And let me draw cubes and And the other thing that's so maddening about this, if every single time you did the Common Core that way, if every single time a square was 100 and a cube was 1,000, even I could figure it out. But it's always different. Sometimes it's squiggly lines, it's dots, it's dashes. One famous example that came from Wisconsin elementary school, because we were the dairy state. Kids were required in elementary school to learn how to add and subtract by drawing cows. You had to draw, for whatever the problem was, you had to draw enough cows so that if you counted the legs of the cows, you could get to the answer. And without the cows, the answer was incomplete. You understand how much time this takes? If you're going to put kids in groups, you got to give them, 10 minutes to figure out what they think the answer is? You put them at boards? This is why you can't get serious math done. But they don't want serious math done. This is socialized math. This is social justice math. Everybody will be comfortable. Do you know that we've lost more gifted and talented programs in this country in the last 2 years than in the previous 40? Do you know that in the last month, 12 different high school districts have pulled all calculus classes from their books? If you're a kid in 8th grade and you can do calculus, schools are now not offering it. One Florida school this summer pulled the calculus class out. So no kid, however good he is, can take it. And they replaced it with diversity and math, a sociological course on how to make the teaching for kids in high school, how to make math a more diverse subject. No calculus. But it has to be this way. You understand when you have these kind of standards? It is every bit as bad to exceed the standards as it is to fall behind them. As a matter of fact, if you get way ahead of the standards, that's worse for Common Core. Think about it. If a lot of kids fail the tests, you simply lower the standard. By lowering the standard, you bring more kids on board. But if you've got kids who are allowed to excel, those kids, in the same way that I could do English at a really high level, you got a lot of kids who can do math at a high level, right? And if those kids now are not allowed to do that because they skew the standard, that's the social injustice behind this curriculum. And if you don't believe me, look at this. This is one of 22 different school districts I have already found in this country who've made statements like this on their website. This is from the entire Irvine Unified High School District in Orange County, California. What happened was that kids in California kids were beginning to demonstrate that by the time they hit 4th grade, they could not add and subtract independently. They literally needed help adding and subtracting without the circles and the squares. So California moms and dads began to freak out. You've got the headphones on your phone. Your phone is on. There you go. All right. So by 4th grade, what had happened? What had happened in 4th grade was these California kids were struggling. They couldn't do their independent math. So moms and dads started freaking out and hiring tutors and helping kids work ahead. The school this may be the most shocking thing I've showed you. You've got American schools now ordering moms and dads not to let their kids get ahead in math subjects. Here's a warning and a threat. This is what they say. The links on this page, the warning, are intended to support the classroom instruction that your child receives from his teacher. It is not appropriate to go ahead of classroom instruction or to use this site to have your child work on math that is intended for use in subsequent grades. There's the warning, and here is the threat. Your child's math instruction and math placement will not change as a result of working ahead. This means that your child will continue to work in the grade level appropriate math regardless of any work that is done and submitted to the teacher. I don't care if you can read Shakespeare in 3rd grade. You're going to sit there and read Beezus and Ramona like the rest of the kids. And if that had happened to me, I might never have entered the high finance world of English professor. But you get it, right? And if you're a kid who can do serious math, you have to be if you can be doing geometry in 3rd grade, you gotta sit there in those stupid groups and draw those stupid cubes until you get to geometry class in 10th and 11th grade now in high schools. You see what this is? This is a program, and now your 3rd definition is Common Core, and it's one word. You give me one word to tell you what Common Core is, and I'm gonna tell you that word is statism. The point of this entire endeavor is to convince your kids first and foremost that they belong to the state, not to the families, not to the moms and dads, not to their local religious communities. Look at what you've seen here so far. Why? The federal government pumping its own propaganda into your kids' English class. You've got Common Core math that makes no sense, but only the schools and the textbooks can handle it. We got CPAs and doctors in Green Bay who can't help their kids with their elementary school math. What do you think the purpose of that is? Who do they go to when they want the answers? And now the sexuality stuff, too, we'll talk about. What is the point of that? Data mining, real quick digression. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but if you ever get a chance sometime, read the Race to the Top application. Besides requiring states that take Common Core, Race to the Top also requires states that take federal money, and 46 did, including South Dakota, to report meaningful data on children's personal and professional educational lives to the federal government. Simply by being a part of Race to the Top, you are now obligated to report data to the federal government. This is the data mining, the data facility the federal government built in the Utah desert, finished it last year. Multi-billion-dollar facility. And the whole purpose of this is to store your kids' data. Remember when I went to school, the only thing that ever appeared on your transcript was your final grade. Under Common Core, every test grade, every quiz grade, every homework mark, every behavioral assessment, every medical problem your kid has in school, is he ADHD in grade 8? Is he dyslexic in grade 5? That becomes part of your kid's permanent educational record. And the federal government has already said they plan to make those files available to employers when your kids go to get jobs. So what, under Obamacare, your kid's a child till he's 27, right? So at 28, when your kid goes to get his first job, you just passed a big test. The smart audiences laugh at that little joke, so good for you. But my point is that whenever your kids now go to get jobs, think about what this means. If your kid wants to be an accountant or a lawyer or get into graduate school or pursue any professional trade, medical school, the people now making the decisions on whether they get in, whether they get hired, are going to know if in 8th grade your kid was on Ritalin. This is a shocking amount of information to have. So disgusting is this that the people of Utah, God bless them, are trying to pass legislation to cut the water off to this building. Now think about this. This is the most environmental administration in in world history. Do you know they built this in the middle of the Utah desert? And do you know that this building requires 4 million gallons of water a day to cool those computers? 4 million gallons, right? That's part of the data mining. And they're not just going to ask your kids. They're not just going to ask your kids questions and measure their performance. This is a document, if it's not a federal curriculum, why is the Department of Education creating these supporting documents for Common Core? This is from February of 2013. You can find it online. This is promoting grit, tenacity, and perseverance. These are the critical factors for success in the 21st century in education. Now, is that your vision of education? Is education for your kids gritting it out? Is it tenacity, just hang in there? But given what I've shown you, do you understand why they think that way? Education for the government now is not about letting your kids become what they are, discover themselves, discover new worlds and career paths. It's drudgery. When I hear the word grit, I always imagine John Wayne getting a bullet dug out of his thigh with a hot Bowie knife. This is staggering, right, when you think about this. But if you open this document, find it online, to the 43rd page, you see this. These are the ways they also want to biologically meter your kids. They don't want to just collect data. They want to measure your kids' vital functions when they're doing it. Do you know that Bill Gates and Michael Barber of Pearson Publishing are both pushing collaboratively, investing money to try to create an MRI scan for use in classrooms? They want to be able to bring brain scans. The technology's not there, but they want to bring brain scans eventually into the classroom so they can monitor your kid's brain waves while she's doing her little cubes and squares on the board. These things, the one on the right is my favorite. It's basically a blood pressure cuff that these maniacs have adapted to a little child's wrist. It measures pulse and heart rate and blood pressure. In other words, it's a miniature lie detector. We have one little girl, 13-year-old girl in New York. Mom pulled her out of the schools because she came home one day last year with a big angry purple bruise on her wrist. The only reason Mom knew. What happened to you? Well, Mom, the principal and the vice principal and one of the nurses pulled me into a room. They put that around her wrist. They obviously had it too hard, had it too tight. And they asked her dozens and dozens of questions, including questions like, do your parents vote? Did they vote in the last election? Who did they vote for in the last election? Are there guns in your house? Would you feel better if somebody from the school came and took those guns away? Are your parents divorced? This little girl's parents were. Would you feel better if somebody from the school helped you live with the parent of your choice? These were among the questions that were being asked, right? And also, I should say, I don't have time to get into it too much. I want to be a little respectful of the time. But if you look at the 27,000-page Obamacare document, there are also, I've got them, I can send you the information for this if you want it, all sorts of places in Obamacare where the schools are mandated to become data gathering information on your kids in the name of health. So it ties in with that other big national program, right? Common Core becomes a Trojan horse for healthcare legislation to demand this information from your families and your kids. Do you know, one of the reasons Indiana pulled out? Indiana is the first state in the union to have warrantless searches of people's homes simply on school requests. Because under the Obamacare legislation, if a teacher or an administrator thinks there's a problem with a kid, they can summon federal agents, and it supersedes, well, they claim it supersedes, right, federal privacy, constitutional privacy guarantees. We have had 2 situations in Indiana, these are all in the newspaper, the Indianapolis Star, where the federal agents were called by schools. They went into parents' homes without a warrant because schools were worried that things were happening. This has already happened. It's a big deal in Indiana, right? Other things, like a mouse for the computer that measures if your kid sweats or grabs the mouse too tightly. Posture chairs. Do certain subjects or topics or themes cause your kid to slouch in his chair? And beware, particularly my conservative friends here, beware. We think that technology is a wonderful thing, and when companies like Microsoft hand out iPads to all your students, do you understand the kind of global satellite tracking position they put in those things? Do you understand that they all have keystroke technology? So every word typed on that computer gets dumped into your kid's file? And look, this is not paranoid. I'm not arguing that somebody's sitting there watching in real time your kid type. But it's like the NSA spying. They collect all these phone calls, they can't possibly listen to them, but they dump them in files. And if somebody ever complains that you're a terrorist, they can go into your file, and whatever conversations they may have captured on you, they can then pick them apart. It's exactly the same thing here. Facial recognition cameras. When your little daughter opens her laptop, this happened in one Pennsylvania school district. All the high school kids were told at the beginning of last school year, no school supplies. The only school supply we'll be using for all the high school kids in every district school, is a laptop computer. And moms and dads were not permitted to provide their own. The kids showed up the first day of class, they were handed a school computer, and the moms and dads in the public school were billed $650 for the use of that computer. That computer had NASA-grade global positioning tracking devices in it. Every keystroke ever hit on that computer was monitored and recorded, and every time the laptop was turned on, a camera in the center literally recorded anyone who walked in front or anyone who was watching that computer. So imagine your 8th grade daughter doing her math homework on one of those computers. And her little 6th grade daughter gets out of the shower and waddles naked across the view. All that's captured. Now again, is some twisted principal sitting in a room watching it? No. But if for any reason they needed to go into your kid's file, they could do that. This is some of the dangers that are coming with this. And by the way, Gates is adamant that this is a feature to be proud of. Gates' main interest in all of this is the technology and how it can control and document and monitor. Gates has already come out and said he'd like to see a version of Common Core data mining extend from college all the way through the first 10 years after. He wants college kids to be monitored this way, mandatorily, by the time they get their freshman year, and for 6 years after they graduate, he wants data collected on them. Right? All right, last thing we have to do. Why the sex? I want your help with this. We're almost done, and I appreciate your patience. We're almost done. Help me out with this. This document is the National Sexuality Education Standards. It was published in September of 2012, exactly when Common Core English and Math were being put into your schools. Look at now, the fact that it's national means who owns it? The federal government. The fact that they're standards means how are they going to have to be measured? Tests. Look at the subtitle. Core content. What do you think that means? This is core content and the sexuality skills. They're going to teach your kids. And when do they start doing that? Do you teach your 5-year-olds about sex? Do you teach your 5-year-olds about homosexuality? Because they're about to start doing it. They're doing it right now. These are the National Sexuality Education Standards. Core content. And you still don't think this is Common Core related? You can find this online too. Open up to page 6 and you'll see this. When the standards were put together, they consulted other things to create them. Look at the last thing on that list. When the National Sexuality Standards were created, they were informed by the work of Common Core state standards for English language arts and mathematics. You explain to me what a national sex ed curriculum has to do with math. Why? And do you notice the other thing? If you want to say this doesn't mean it's Common Core, well, wait a second. Look at this. They don't cite any non-Common Core subjects. If you're going to cite subjects to do, why is it only English and Math and why is it only Common Core? Because that's all we had in 2012. Notice how it doesn't cite non-Common Core science. Why wouldn't it cite non-Common Core biology? Wouldn't standard biology be more helpful to sexuality standards in math class? The only subject area they quote is English and Math. Why? because this curriculum, these standards, were never meant to be rolled out as something you could adopt or not adopt. Because look, there's not a state in the union, if you said to them, here's your Common Core English, here's your Common Core Math, here's your Common Core sex standards. There's not a Democrat, well, there's some. There's not a liberal, very few liberal politicians would be brave enough to bring that to their state. So what they designed this for is to be fed into every aspect of your kid's curriculum. I have seen the science guidelines. It is shocking in what the science curriculum, how sexualized the science curriculum is. It is absolutely shocking, which is coming next. The history curriculum, the A-push. Stop, get ahead of yourself. I please want you to recognize this. Why in the world are they quoting only 2 subject areas, Common Core English and Math? Here's what the standards do. You understand this, right? If they're going to start teaching your kids at 5 years old, we don't put 5-year-olds in biology class. We don't put 6-year-olds in sex ed classes. If you're going to start teaching kids that young, you have to make sex an aspect of every part of the curriculum. That's what this document does. Notice the insidiousness of this. It's not something you can vote in or vote out. It is, Common Core is the Trojan horse through which this sexuality standards get funneled into every aspect of the classroom. What they do is they break your kids up into 3-year cycles. 5, 6, 7-year-olds, test. 8, 9, 10-year-olds, test. 11, 12, 13-year-olds, test. That's what they do. Let me show you some of the standards taken directly from the document. By the end of 2nd grade, by the time your daughter is 7, she will identify different kinds of family structures and demonstrate ways to show respect for different types of families. So by the time your kid's 6 and 7, she's going to have to be exposed to single-parent families, multi-parent families, polyamorous families, homosexual families, and she's going to have to demonstrate respect for all of those families to the school's satisfaction. Do you see what they're doing here? Why do I say statism? The reason you don't teach your kids, whatever your views of homosexuality are, the reasons you don't teach your kids at that young age is because they don't know what they're learning. The school is going to make them demonstrate. Who gets to define what respect means? Look, and even if you think the federal government should be teaching your kids about sex, I don't. But even if you think they should, this is not about birth control, and it's not about biology. This is how it happens. You remember back, some of you are old enough to remember back in the 70s, when a lot of us protested the beginning of sexuality education in the schools, and they laughed and said, when we said, this is going to lead to stuff like this is just about biology, it's just about safety, this is what happens in 2 generations. Right? Do you understand that this has nothing to do with biology, this is pure sociology? Your kid, by the time she's 7, will give our definition of, and I want my kids to respect everybody. But if your kid comes from a devout Muslim home, or an evangelical Christian home, or a Roman Catholic home, or an Orthodox Jewish home, right? Is your definition of respect going to be the same as theirs? How about this? By the time your daughter's 7, she is going to have to describe differences and similarities in how boys and girls may be expected to act. Because if right numbers don't matter in math, then biology doesn't matter either. There's no such thing as boys and girls. It's all this it's in your schools too, all this commitment now to transgenderism, all these 50 different kinds of gender confusion, all the requirement in states now to build in high schools and middle schools, gender-neutral bathrooms, that kids who think they're one or the other, all this is coming, and how does a 6-year-old, even if you think, oh, that's a great idea, how does a 5-year-old process this? Look at the next, we wouldn't ask a question this dumb to college kids. Look at this. By the time your daughter's 7, she's got to provide examples of how friends, family, media, society, and culture influence ways boys and girls think they should act. You're going to send your 6-year-old to the internet for a sex and gender search. Really? What does that mean? Even if you think it is the government's job to teach birth control and biology, sperm and egg, what does this have to do with this? By the time your little boy is 10, before he even hits puberty, he is going to have to, look at this bottom one, define sexual orientation as the romantic attraction of an individual to someone of the same gender or a different gender. You are prescribing for kids how they will define this. You leave them no room to dissent, you need them no room to object, and because it's a national standard, you can't opt out of it. How about this one? Students need opportunities to engage in cooperative and active learning strategies with regards to the sexuality standards. How about this one? Sufficient time must be allocated for students to practice skills relating to sexuality education. How about this? Students need multiple opportunities and a variety of assessment strategies to determine their achievement of the sexuality education standards and performance. You see how copious this is, how all-encompassing. This is not something you can opt your kids out of. This is not something you can do in biology in 6th grade for a semester. This is a complete sexual curriculum that absolutely interposes the schools between you and your kids. What happens if you have different views of sexuality than they do? Who do you think under this national standard now that all kids have to test to, who do you think's going to win that battle? Do you not see how easily, if you're a mom and dad who happens to be an evangelical Christian and you teach your kids to respect all people, but that marriage is between a man and a woman, can you not see how easily this could get you in trouble with Child Protective Services as abusing your kids? If this is the standard definition, the national standard, this is a big deal. But this is, and understand me well, and please take seriously what I said to you. Is this Common Core? I don't know. It either is or it might be, but the one thing you can't say is that it's not. When they put this together, they consulted Common Core Math and English, the only 2 subject areas they picked. You remember now we left that question hanging? Why is there so much sex for so young kids? Now do you understand why it's there? Because they have to expose them to those shocking situations earlier and earlier and earlier to get them to the standards. Common Core is a national program. We've proved that, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is a national program. This program boasts at its core content. This program cites English and math for Common Core as models for doing what it does. You've seen the curriculum. I don't care if it is or isn't anymore. There's no distinction between them. And let me prove something. This is the most really disturbing thing I'm going to show you. I want to show you, like the Common Core Math, this is already in your schools. The poster that I'm about to show you, and here it is, it hangs in a middle school in Shawnee, Kansas. And Shawnee, Kansas is not hippy-dippy Madison, Wisconsin, or Berkeley, California. It's the Bible Belt. This poster has hung on the wall all last school year, every day, all day. It's at the front of the room next to a picture of Clifford the Big Red Dog. It was a 6th grader who took the picture and brought it home to her dad. And it's still there. Now look at the title of the poster. How do people express their sexual feelings? And did you know that saying I like you is a sexual? When you say I like you to somebody, did you know that's sexual? Did you know that a hug is sexual? Did you know that dancing is sex? And this is such a hallmark of Common Core English. Do you notice how they got talking on there twice? Proofreading, mechanics, correctness. What matters is the message. This is pure sociology. Look at this. Alongside things like talking twice and hugging, you've got some pretty vulgar things up there. And do you understand that for a public school system obsessed with birth control to the point of fetishization, there's no suggestion, not the slightest suggestion, that some of those things might lead to pregnancy or that some of those things might lead to disease? You know what that is? That's mind control. What they're telling you is, if you accept any of those things as legitimate, and what little 6th grader is going to see saying I like you as illegitimate? If you accept any one of those things, you have to accept them all. Or if you reject any one of those things, what possible biological purpose does this serve? This is 100% sociological indoctrination of your kids, and it's shocking. And even worse than this is the response Dad got. Predictably, Dad freaked out. Well, here's what the response was. Notice, this is from Hawker Grove Middle School spokeswoman, Leanne Neal of Shawnee, Kansas. The poster that you reference is actually part of our middle school health and science. What did you see on that poster that pertains to health and science? Part of our middle school health. That's what I'm telling you about the coming national next generation science standards. This is what passes for science. Pure sociology. The poster that you reference is actually part of our middle school health and science materials, and so it is part of our district-approved curriculum. Where did it come from? What's the justification? How come it didn't get taken down? Because we can't take it down. We got it from the national standards. We have no authority to take it down. In any other circumstance, this would not have been put up in a 6th grade classroom. In any other circumstance, a complaining dad would have had it removed. But the school's telling you now, the standard won't let us. The curriculum it is a part of aligns with the national standards around those topics. And so in Shawnee, Kansas, that stays where it is. For a next generation of middle school students is about to wander into that classroom and be exposed to that stuff. Last thing, and we're done. Not surprisingly, particularly in states that have had it longer than you have, New York, Florida, Kentucky, certain parts of California this was tested in. This is causing a shocking amount of acting out on the part of particularly young kids. Very destructive behavior. We got little kids mutilating themselves. It's one thing for 15 and 16-year-old girls to go through a bad phase, but we got kids as young as 7 and 8 now cutting themselves, refusing to go to school. We have a document with over 250 clinical psychiatrists, social workers, child development specialists of all different political backgrounds begging states to get out of this because it is developed. You heard Josh Katz say it, the liberal. You heard Karen Lewis say it. Little kids can't do this. You can't force this stuff on 7-year-old minds and expect them to be able to hold it. I can only show you one. This is Dr. Mary Calamia in New York. She is testifying before the New York Senate Select Committee on Common Core. Now do you understand why liberal New York and liberal New York teachers unions is struggling to find a way out of this? Here's her testimony. She didn't know what Common Core was 2 years ago when little elementary school kids were being brought to her that were suffocating themselves, banging their heads on walls. Listen to her testimony and we'll wrap this up.
Good afternoon. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm a psychotherapist. I work with parents, children, and about half of my caseload is teachers also. My caseload represents about 20 different school districts in Suffolk County. In the fall of 2012, my phone started ringing. I started getting an inordinate number of referrals of students, a lot of honor students, 8th graders mostly, who were self-mutilating. They were cutting themselves with sharp objects, and they were burning themselves with cigarettes. My phone never stopped. And I didn't know why. I asked the kids, and all they kept saying was, "We can't take the pressure, it's too much." I also started getting a lot of elementary school students referred to me. They were refusing to go to school. They said they felt stupid and that school was too hard. They were throwing tantrums, begging to stay home, and upset to the point of vomiting. I was hearing from parents about kids bringing home homework they couldn't help them with. I was alarmed to hear that in some cases there were no textbooks for the parents to look at, and they had no idea what their children were learning. The teachers were reporting a staggering level of anxiety and depression, and that was when I first heard the term Common Core, and learned about the standards that we now say set the bar so high anyone can walk right under it. Everyone was talking about the tests. As the school year progressed and the tests loomed, my patients were increasing their self-mutilating behaviors. They were complaining of insomnia, panic attacks, loss of appetite, depressed mood, and in one case, suicidal thoughts that resulted in a 2-week hospital stay for an adolescent. We can't regulate biology. Young children cannot engage in the type of critical thinking that the Common Core calls for. That would require a fully developed prefrontal cortex, a part of the brain that is not fully functional until adulthood. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for critical thinking, rational decision-making, and abstract thought, all things that the Common Core requires prematurely. We give children pre-assessments, tell them to succeed, and then give them tests on material they haven't learned and tell them it's okay to fail. They cannot resolve that mixed message. Last spring, a 6-year-old encountered a multiplication sign on the NWEA first grade math exam and asked the teacher what it was. The teacher was not allowed to help him and told him to just do his best. From that point on, the student's test performance went downhill. He couldn't shake off the unfamiliar symbol and couldn't believe his teacher wouldn't help him. The Common Core requires children to read informational texts that are owned by a handful of corporations. They don't have a filter to distinguish good information from bad. So whatever you put in front of them, they take that as gospel. They're literal. So when we give them a textbook that explains the Second Amendment as The people have the right to keep and bear arms in a state militia. They will look no further for clarification. We ask them to write critically using emotionally charged language to persuade instead of inform. They don't have that functional prefrontal cortex, so they tap into their limbic system, which is the part of the brain that involves basic human emotions, anger and fear being the foremost. So when we ask them to use emotionally charged language, we're actually asking them to fuel their language with fear and anger and aggression. They cannot temper this judgment. They don't have the ability to do that. So we teach to the test, which I think doesn't really measure learning. I think the tests measure endurance and resilience. Only a child who can sit still for 90 minutes, come back the next day and do it again, and the next day again, can succeed. I'm going to introduce you to a couple, I'm almost done. I'm going to introduce you just a couple of student stories, okay? A couple of the faces of the Common Core. We have an entire third grade class that spent the entire day sobbing after one testing session. A second grader who witnessed this is now in third grade and won't go to school. She's being evaluated, a 7-year-old being evaluated for psychotropic medication just to get her to go to school. A 6-year-old who came home crying because in September, in the first grade, she didn't know what a vertex was. 2 8-year-olds opted out of the ELA exam and were publicly denied cookies because the teacher gave them to the class but wouldn't give them to them. And that teacher, who under duress, felt obligated to do such a thing. A 6th grader who once aspired to be a writer but now won't do it because we do it all day long, even in math. And a mother who has to leave work early because her son is hysterical over his math homework, and his CPA grandfather who's babysitting for him can't even help him do it. And countless other kids who are refusing to go to school, feel stupid, and now are completely turned off to education. I will conclude with this one thought. Our country became a superpower on the backs of men and women who learned in one-room schoolhouses. This isn't rocket science. It doesn't take a great deal of technology or corporate or government involvement to help our children to succeed. We need to rethink the Common Core and the associated high-stakes testing and get back to the business of educating our children in a safe, healthy, and productive manner. Thank you.
Okay, there's the website. I'm traveling a lot, South Dakota the next couple of days, North Dakota. If I don't respond immediately, give me a couple of days, I'll get you the stuff. Whatever you want, you can have it. Please listen to this last comment, and then we'll take questions. Listen to this. You know, everything you heard today, think about who told you this. Bill Gates, Salon.com, left-wing website. Dr. Mary, clinical psychologist. You heard from Milgram and Stopsy, the 2 experts hired by Common Core to validate. You heard from teachers and teachers' unions. You know what? There's no debate about this. Common Core wins and thrives on ignorance and apathy. That's the only way this happens. When you now know what this is, even if you think I'm personally full of it, even if you think I'm personally full of it, how do you argue with them? Look it up for yourself. The fact is that when people understand what this is, you see, and I apologize, they do it, what they do is they pass home these cutesy little flyers. How many of you have seen them from the schools? Facts and myths of Common Core, right? Common Core is a federal takeover. Myth, Common Core is a federal program. Fact, it's a state-led initiative. And that's all they do. You see why it took me almost 3 hours to do this? I could have gone another 3. You can't, and they count on that. 27,000 pages of a healthcare law. They knew you weren't going to read it. And they also know most people, and I'm going to tell you this, if you look around the room here tonight, this has been true of most places I've spoken. About 60 to 70% of the people who come in here to speak are grandpas and grandpas. Grandpas and grandpas, right? For every one mom and dad we get in a talk like, and I understand it, to make it in this country, particularly if you're a young family, there's a reason we have a 2 working family economy. You think that's an accident? You think it's an accident that in the 50s, one parent could stay home anyway? The idea that we need moms and dads to be working full time, right? Why do you think they want mandatory pre-K? Why do you think they want college paid for, man? Everybody should go to college, right? I said it in one word, statism. This is about control. It's about in the same way that healthcare, whatever else it is, merits and demerits, its main purpose is to control your body. The state now is responsible for your body, more than your doctor is and more than you are. And now this is the same thing with education. And I think this is more transformative immediately than even healthcare. Because generations of, what did Abraham Lincoln say? The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation is the philosophy of government in the next. You've got choices now. You've heard it. This is great. I'll give you all the information. I don't even matter anymore because you heard them. We'll come back if you need us to. But between now and the test, when your kids, here's what's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen this summer, and nothing's going to happen until the election's over. Nobody wants to commit one way or the other. And we've got some brave politicians here, I know, who are absolutely willing to do that. But the majority of politicians on the Democrat and Republican side, including my own Governor Walker in Wisconsin, refuse to commit one way or the other. Because if you commit to fighting Common Core, then the teachers union comes after you. And if you, at least in states like Wisconsin and South Dakota, where the unions are still on board, right? And if you come out for Common Core, then you're going to get harassed. At one point this summer, we literally had Walker getting 10,000 phone calls a week begging him to get out of Common Core. After that happened, he came out and said, about a month ago, because of these phone calls, Walker came out and said, and I like Governor Walker, but he's wrong on Common Core. He came out and said, his first concession, he said, I believe Wisconsin can do better than Common Core and we should create our own standards. Everybody cheered. We were ecstatic. 4 days later, speaking at a political rally at a teachers group, he told the teachers, any new standards, don't worry, any new standards will look very close to Common Core. And let me, before I beat up on Walker too much, because he's done a lot of good things, I suppose I understand the politics of this. He took on the teachers union and won and got recalled for it. The teachers unions we showed you dumped $150 million into Wisconsin, and he still won. I understand his unwillingness to poke that bear again in an election year, but he just published a book called Unintimidated. Right? I don't know what he will or won't do after the election. It's a shame we have to wait till elections for this. So what I'm telling you is, you're not going to move the needle much this year. But when those tests hit in the spring, it's going to be explosive. If you do this, if you keep this slow simmer burning, then you have something to combust when the tests hit. If you forget about this and don't think about it again till the test, nothing's going to come of it. But if you continue, and there's a lot of people, I can't name them all, right? A lot of great people here working hard on this. You bring other people in. You know, you can get Sandy Stotsky to come to your state and tell you why it's bad. And all she'll charge you is hotel and plane fare. You could do this, right? Every month bring somebody and get more people who haven't heard it to heard it. Because if you can do this, if you can, in the next 8 months, between now and when your kids have their first test, if you can simmer, keep the pot boiling, those tests are the ignition key that will blow this up. But if nothing happens between now and then, the tests will hit, then they're going to weather that storm and move on. That's just where we are. I know some of you in the question and answer period here, I'll stay as long as you need me to, and I know that one of your first questions are going to be what we can do. Oh, I'm sorry. One of the big questions is going to be what can you do, right? And I'm just telling you, forget the feds. They're not your friend in this. And as far as impact, forget your school boards. I'm sorry. Generally speaking, in 33 states, there have been a lot of school board members, they will not do this because the school boards are mostly in contact with the educational professionals. And the educational professionals at the top levels want this because there's a lot of money behind it. So what you got to do is work on your state and local guys, right? Forget the congressman you're sending to Washington and the senator. Who's your state senator? Who's your local assemblyman? You got an election coming up. Make this a litmus test, right? I voted for you last time, but I need to know where you stand on this, right? This is a critical issue. If I give you my vote again, or if I vote for you as the incumbent, will you commit to helping us remove this? That's how it gets the legislature in the states has to fix this. The schools can't and won't do it. The school boards don't feel like they can because their bread is buttered on the education side, not the mom and dad side, for most school board members. That's been true of every place I've been. It's got to be the state and local legislators. And I'm going to tell you this, as somebody who considers himself to be both Christian and conservative, I have had a much harder time with Republicans on this than Democrats. I'm just telling you. And that's not a praise of the Democrats. They like it. They want it. Much of what we've talked about here is part of their platform. They like control. They like the expansion of government. They don't think your kids should belong to you. Remember Melissa Harris Perry? We got to get you guys to the point where you stop recognizing that your kids belong to you, right? How about what Arnie Duncan said, your Secretary of Education, right? Arnie Duncan said, oh, the only people protesting Common Core are a bunch of rich white suburban moms who can't handle the fact that the kids aren't as smart as they thought they were. There's your Department of Education secretary last year. Right? So when I say the Democrats are easier to deal with, we know where they stand. This is utterly not a problem for them. That's where they are. But your Republicans, in every state I've been in, including my own, they play the fence, they stand in the middle. The Chamber of Commerce, the National Chamber of Commerce wants Common Core. Well, the same reason they want Common Core is the reason they want open borders. They want steady, cheap, uneducated labor that's not going to have to be promoted and paid a lot of money. As a matter of fact, you think that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the National Chambers of Commerce have received millions from Gates to propagandize for Common Core. But the Jeb Bushes of the world and the Mike Huckabees of the world, they support Common Core. And their only answer is, it's good for business, right? Regardless of the consequences. Right? And I told you, and I love Governor Walker, but on this issue, the dallying, to turn around one day and placate us with we can do better, and then when you get in front of a group of teachers, you're telling them what? That any new standards we craft will be remarkably similar to Common Core. In fact, that's what Indiana did. Indiana, Republican Governor Mike Pence pulled Indiana out. Great, but you know what he did? He simply handed the decision back to the school administrators. And what they did is they kept 95% of Common Core, 95%, and stamped it Indiana standards. That's what Republican Governor Pence did. Good for him, he pulled out. But then he turned it right back to the people who put this in the first place. So now they have Indiana standards in Wisconsin. They don't have Common Core. Yet the Indiana standards are 95% of what Common Core was. So close are they to Common Core that the Common Core, the federal money, the federal people are still paying them as if they had Common Core because there's no meaning. And that's the last thing I'll say, and then I'll take your questions. Be wary. Eldon said it. You get rid of Common Core, you are just killing the ugly tumor that you see. You have to kill Common Core, not because it's progressively worse than what you had before, but because the feature of Common Core, if it gets fully implemented, you will not be able to pull it out from the bottom up anymore. This is the death of not just state and local control, but you see this, right? This is the coming death of moms and dads being able to educate their kids philosophically, culturally, literary-wise, and religiously the way they think they should. This is what's at stake here. Right? This is the big problem with this. So you got to get rid of Common Core for that. But even if you got rid of Common Core tomorrow, 90% of this is still going to be in your schools, including the national sexuality standards. It's still going to be there. We're going to have to get rid of Common Core, and then and the last point that I make is, as moms and dads, for way too long, we have sat back and done nothing. We've dropped our kids off to these schools 8 hours a day and let the schools deal with them. We don't go to PTA meetings. What is the turnout in your local community for school board elections? 8%, 10%? Can't be bothered, right? You get rid of the only silver lining is moms and dads are energized by Common Core more than any other educational issue in the last 50 years. We got to build on that. But a lot of moms and dads will get to the point where I had one mom tell me, we have a private school, and she put her kid in our school because of Common Core. And then a month ago, when Governor Walker came out and said we can do better than Common Core, she immediately called and pulled her kid out and put him back in the public schools. And she said, well, we don't have to worry about Common Core anymore. Governor Walker said we'll do better. There's these kind of things to consider, all right? This is a big deal. I thank you very, very much for bringing me here and for listening to me. It's been a long night, and I will take any questions you have. Thank you very much.